At the very heart of this bloody nightmare, on a throne of bones and ash, sat the king, silently gazing over his domain. But, through the barrier of worlds, echoes of the desperate struggle of the one who dared to disturb this peace reached him. Kim Tae-hyung, bleeding but unbroken, continued to walk forward, driven only by pure rage. The king only smiled condescendingly, anticipating the quick and inevitable death of the impudent mortal. However, Tae-hyung had no intention of backing down, unleashing all his hatred on the demons that stood in his way. A crushing blow broke the crimson silence, causing the very earth to tremble. The mighty monster, believing in its own invincibility, fell backwards, unable to withstand this insane onslaught. The defeated enemy fell silent in the dust, enveloped in the fading violet flame of his powerlessness. With his last strength, the demon tried to rise, choking on his own poisonous blood. But Kim Tae-hyung no longer paid attention to him, walking through the raging storm of dark energy. New nightmares awaited him ahead, bearing their deadly fangs. The eternal darkness stretched its clawed paws towards him, ready to devour the remnants of his humanity. An ancient evil has risen from the abyss itself, its bloodshot eyes shining in anticipation of a feast. And in the midst of this chaos, Tae-hyung's gaze fell on his ally lying in ruins. Yoshikawa Surara lay motionless, only a pale smile frozen on her wounded face. At that moment, the last thread connecting the young man with his past was broken. A monstrous primordial force surged through his veins, distorting his flesh in monstrous ways. The heart began to beat in a frantic, furious rhythm, counting down the seconds until the true madness began. A clawed paw touched the cooling earth, absorbing the power of the underworld itself. Now Kim Tae-hyung was ready to turn this world into ashes, and no one in the world could stop him. A gigantic monster appeared before him, shaking the ruined streets with its menacing appearance. His guttural roar echoed across the ruins, promising a swift and painful death to anyone who dared to stand in his way. But Kim Tae-hyung didn't even flinch, deftly slipping under the crushing swing of the giant axe. A cold determination was frozen on his bloodied face, and his hand, shrouded in filth, reached out to meet the enemy. Like lightning, he rushed past the monster's bulky body, forcing it to attack the void. Consumed by rage, the creature could not keep up with the enemy's frantic pace, trying in vain to predict his next move. The axe soared upward again, cutting through the air in a mad attempt to reach the nimble, insolent fellow. But the young man moved faster than thought, dodging each deadly blow and leaving behind only crimson flashes. The demon let out a furious cry, realizing that his overwhelming superiority and strength was melting away before his eyes. With one powerful push, Tae-hyung soared high into the sky, looking down at his clumsy enemy. The force of gravity and accumulated anger carried him down, turning the boy's body into a piercing spear of retribution. A crushing stream of dark energy pierced straight into the monster's flesh, tearing it apart. The giant howled in unbearable pain as the black flames began to consume him from the inside. Without slowing down, Tae-hyung rushed through the wound, inflicting more and more rapid cuts. A cold fire burned in his only remaining eye. There was no room for mercy in this battle. Landing right in front of the monster, he delivered a crushing blow with his fist into the giant's very chest. The ancient core of the monster glowed beneath his fingers, unable to withstand the onslaught of his primordial power. Ominous, fiery cracks ran across the giant's body, foreshadowing the imminent death of the creature of darkness. With a deafening crack, Tae-hyung thrust his hand even deeper, tearing the enemy's energy heart into tiny fragments. Tars, a blinding flash of light illuminated the battlefield, marking the victory of the one who had finally ceased to be a mere man. The monster let out its last, terrified scream as its body cracked at the seams from the excess, destructive energy. A powerful blast wave tore the monster apart, crushing reality itself around it. Tae-hyung floated limply among the airborne debris, feeling the fury of the great battle fade away. His wounded face was covered in blood, but in his one remaining eye, the ominous scarlet flame of primordial power still smoldered. Finally, a ringing silence, illuminated by cold sunlight, reigned over the half-destroyed city. Rescuers hastily carried survivors from the battlefield, clearing the rubble of once peaceful streets. Meanwhile, the culprit of this chaos was already posing in front of a prison cell, not showing the slightest remorse for what he had done. Yoshikawa Surara personally arrived to report to the leadership, ready to answer for the failure of such an important operation. Opposite her sat Go Tae-wook, a stern and cold-blooded leader whose single glance made his subordinates tremble with fear. The news of the indescribable strength that Tae-hyung had demonstrated in this fight left Surara in complete shock. To save the organization's reputation, Lim A-yeon had to publicly take full blame for what happened. With cameras flashing non-stop, she appeared before a crowd of angry reporters. With difficulty containing her emotions, Aeon offered a deep apology for their failure to prevent the disaster. But while the public was seething with indignation, in the silence of the elite skyscraper, completely different plans were maturing. The influential conspirator watched with a satisfied smile as the old, familiar order collapsed. The footage of Tae-hyung's epic battle was analyzed by the best minds, revealing the boy's incredible potential. His new, terrifying form with a demonic arm promised to change the balance of power throughout the world. This incredible breakthrough by Tai Hyung opened up new, truly limitless possibilities for the shadow puppeteers. All that remained was to carefully direct this destructive power in the direction they needed. After all, on this great chessboard, Taeyong and Cody Wood were already destined to be the main figures in the coming war. The shadow puppeteers continued to weave their intrigues, placing bets on those who could change the balance of power. And then, before the face of one of them, the divine incarnation itself appeared, Igmun, descending in a dazzling radiance. The faceless titan carried within him a primordial power, causing anyone who dared to look upon his majesty to tremble. At the same time, in a secret laboratory, Taehyung decided to take a desperate step by draining a vial of an experimental elixir. An incredible force instantly hit his veins, forcing his body to adapt to the colossal load. But the body's reaction turned out to be much more violent and painful than the calculations predicted. Streams of seething magic began to rapidly burst outward, threatening to destroy everything around. Unable to stay on his feet, the young man collapsed, accidentally knocking over an entire rack of rare reagents. The creator of the formula, who was watching this, was horrified, fearing that the experiment would end in disaster. After all, this potion, which combined the energy of a crystal and a mystical herb, was not intended for mere mortals. The scientist desperately tried to appeal to Taehyung's reason, demanding that he stop absorbing the unstable energy. But in the depths of the boy's consciousness, an ominous voice was already awakening, promising him unlimited power. He slowly turned to face the panicking professor, feeling his body fill with an unprecedented power. He continued to shout excitedly, begging Taehyung to come to his senses before the consequences became irreversible. However, the young man only calmly listened to his warnings, fully understanding that he was now the one setting the rules. Meanwhile, in another training arena, a gifted girl single-handedly crushed superior enemy forces. Concentrating an incredible charge of mana in her palm, she demonstrated absolute control over her power. The elder, standing on the balcony, watched with pride the triumph of his best student. Ahead of them, hidden among the misty mountains, lay the abode of ancient Buddhas, holding the answers to many questions. The tension grew with each passing second as all the key pieces finally took their places on the board. Every move in this game was calculated with the utmost precision, and any wrong glance could reveal hidden intentions. But those who led this party from the shadows only smiled condescendingly, anticipating the coming chaos. The official report has begun, intended to shed light on the recent anomalies that have divided the world into before and after. The first threat was a colossal thunderstorm that opened up mercilessly right in the middle of the raging ocean. The second is an ancient abyss, surrounded by the silent faces of Buddhas, as if sealing something inexpressibly eerie. All these frightening reports were collected together, revealing the terrible truth to the top leadership. The elder listened attentively to the excited reports of his scientists, without uttering a single word. Now the fate of the investigation depended on the decisions made in this cold, neon-lit room. The investigator sent from the center was not going to take the word of those who were used to hiding their secrets. In an instant, her pent-up rage burst forth, sending a crushing wave of force through the guards standing nearby. She was ready to force answers from those who had tested her patience for so long. Even the seasoned elders did not expect such a furious and crushing challenge from the fragile guest. There was an unwavering flame of determination burning in her eyes that could incinerate anyone who stood in her way. However, not a drop of fear was reflected on the face of the mysterious leader, only a barely noticeable, intriguing smile. His sudden, good-natured laughter instantly cut through the deadly tension hanging in the air. This reaction made the girl freeze in confusion, because she expected a brutal rebuff. With a slight bow, the elder promised his full cooperation, skillfully playing the card of a hospitable host. She had to back away, but her intuition told her that there was something sinister behind his friendliness. And at that very moment she felt a chilling presence that made her heart skip a beat, and the elder only silently watched her, knowing that the trap had already slammed shut and there was no way back. High above the city, plunging into darkness, within the walls of a majestic skyscraper, a fate was being decided that no one below could even guess. Yu Yang sat by the panoramic window, thoughtfully gazing at the shining lights of the metropolis and slowly swinging her glass in her hand. There was a subtle sadness on her face, as if the weight of years lived and hidden secrets had finally begun to weigh on her with renewed force. Taking a slow sip, she seemed to be trying to drown out her inner anxiety, but her thoughts stubbornly returned her to the inevitable conversation. Opposite her, maintaining a tense silence, sat Lee Zhong Zi, whose concentrated gaze betrayed an extreme degree of alertness. Yuen turned her cold eyes to him, trying to guess what exactly was hidden behind this mask of absolute calm. But the young man had no intention of backing down. He merely clasped his fingers tighter in front of his face, preparing to voice what should have been said long ago. And when his words finally left his lips, Yuan's pupils narrowed in sudden realization and hidden threat. Zhang Jae looked straight at her, knowing he had touched on a subject she would rather erase from her memory forever. The image of a sinister witch, holding secrets that could destroy their entire familiar world, invisibly materialized in the air. It was a curse from the past that bound them with strong, unbreakable chains that no mortal could break. Cold sweat appeared on the young man's forehead when he remembered the one whose shadow still followed him closely, not giving him a moment's peace. After all, the news was already full of headlines about the deaths of those who dared to challenge this merciless fate. Ayeon only smiled condescendingly, closing her eyes, as if everything that was happening was just a funny game, the ending of which she had long known. This gesture made Jung Jae's blood run cold with horror as he realized how deeply he had underestimated her true nature. Her eyes flashed with an otherworldly neon light, and a predatory, triumphant grin of a true mistress of the situation played on her lips. Leaning forward sharply, she loomed over the table, literally paralyzing him with her overwhelming, suffocating aura. Magical sparks flew from her palms, enveloping the room in a radiance of colossal power that was useless to resist. Ayeon towered over him like a deity, ready at any moment to crush the impudent youth who dared to doubt her power. And at that moment, invisible chains of subordination closed around his wrists, forever depriving him of even the elusive hope of freedom. Kim Tae-young sat with his head down, trying his best to hide the hurricane of emotions raging inside him. But suddenly, a dangerous crimson light flared in the depths of his eyes, a spark of defiance that could not be extinguished. He turned away demonstratively, trying to distance himself from the oppressive presence of the woman who was watching him intently. Her cold and penetrating gaze seemed to be trying to look into the very soul, searching for the slightest signs of weakness. Then the young man only grinned cheekily and leaned back in his chair, as if this whole captivity was just a funny game for him. For a moment, genuine surprise was reflected on her face. No one had ever dared to behave so brazenly towards her before. However, the surprise quickly gave way to a soft, condescending smile, because she still dictated the rules in this room. A heavy, almost tangible silence hung over the softly lit living room, the silence of two strong and irreconcilable rivals. Tae-young thoughtfully clasped his fingers together, mentally calculating each next step in this dangerous game of chess. She just grinned triumphantly, not doubting that all the strings of control were already firmly clamped in her thin fingers. Soon, their confrontation moved to the laboratory, where a colossal portal, shining with azure flames, opened with a roar. The young assistants held their breath, looking with delight and awe at the colossal power of the released energy. The eyes of their leader were filled with the excitement of the coming triumph, for which such enormous sacrifices had been made. Her faithful companion stood next to her, shrouded in an aura of power and ready to remove any obstacle at any moment. The enormous platform slowly lowered them into the darkest and most guarded depths of the secret research complex. Through dark glasses, the man carefully examined his surroundings, assessing the level of security in this critical sector. The heavy footsteps of the Arietals echoed loudly under the high metal vaults of the underground bunker. A majestic elder came out to meet the guests, whose wise and stern appearance spoke without words of his high position in his hierarchy. Hiding their true intentions behind polite half-smiles, the allies exchanged brief glances, ready to begin negotiations. And now, standing before the head of the secret project, they approached the line beyond which a game of a completely different scale began. Upon crossing the threshold of the laboratory, the guests felt how the air around them instantly became heavy and stifling. The lady's companion could barely contain his trembling, realizing that one wrong move could cost them their lives. But this ominous atmosphere only provoked her, awakening a dangerous curiosity. The project's creator merely smiled condescendingly, gesturing for them to move on. Before their eyes opened a colossal hall filled with neat rows of life support capsules. The glow of unnatural neon snatched from the darkness the outlines of what had been so carefully hidden from the rest of the world. Without wasting any time, she confidently headed towards the main reservoir, which was attracting all attention. And what she saw inside made her heart skip a beat for a moment. The woman's face reflected a mixture of profound shock and rising rage. The old man behind her continued to speak, reveling in the triumph of his mad creation, but his words hardly reached the consciousness of the guests, captivated by the terrifying truth. This vessel contained within itself a power capable of once and for all overturning the entire existing balance. Inside, deep in sleep, was the one whose return no one had dared to expect, Cody Wood. And at that very moment, as if sensing a foreign presence, the warrior locked in the glass opened his eyes. A flash of crimson light illuminated the laboratory, announcing the sudden awakening of a deadly weapon. The scientist watched from above with bated breath as his greatest masterpiece reacted to the appearance of uninvited guests. The realization of betrayal and the scale of the threat forced the woman to make an instant decision. The air around her sparkled with a colossal tension ready to burst out. The companion tried to stop her, feeling how space was distorted by the surging power. Unleashing her true destructive magic, she was ready to wipe this damned project from the face of the earth along with all its secrets. The companion could only watch helplessly as the air around them heated up with the colossal tension. Yoshikawa Surara focused all her will, turning her rage into a pure stream of destructive force. But their arrogant opponent didn't even flinch, looking at her preparations with icy calm. The next moment, blinding lightning bolts shot out from her palm, rushing straight towards the hovering platform. Her partner held his breath, desperately hoping that this colossal power would be enough to win. However, the old man only smiled condescendingly, amused by the futile attempts of the uninvited guests. Sarara put all her remaining energy into this crushing blow, causing the walls of the laboratory to shake. Her eyes burned with an unwavering determination to see things through to the end, no matter the cost. A furious wave of pure magic rushed upward, ready to incinerate everything in its path. But the deadly discharge crashed into an invisible barrier, failing to touch his majestic figure. Cold words of disappointment in the attacker's abilities fell from his lips. With a leisurely movement of his hand, he pulled out an ancient artifact, ready to demonstrate the true difference in power. The hunters froze in stupor, feeling the primal horror emanating from this inconspicuous object. An ominous golden sphere was woven into the air, distorting the very space around it. The anomaly instantly absorbed all remnants of the alien magic, nullifying any attempts at resistance. The realization of their own powerlessness before this irresistible power froze their bodies with icy fear. Chirara could not believe that a human could possess such overwhelming power. But the mad old man was not going to stop there, deciding to give his victims a parting gift. A heavy rumble caused the floor to give way under their feet, foreshadowing the imminent collapse of the entire complex. Realizing that there was no time left, they rushed away, desperately trying to escape from this deadly trap. The tension in the air grew with each passing second, causing even the most resilient to break out in a cold sweat. Suddenly, right in the middle of the laboratory, a spatial breach began to open, distorting reality itself. A powerful energy vortex swirled ever more intensely, threatening to engulf everything around. At this critical moment, an ominous figure woven from pure darkness appeared behind the leader. The elder who appeared understood perfectly well the seriousness of what was happening, but his gaze remained unwavering. His words sounded like a death sentence, causing those present to freeze in shock. The realization of an imminent catastrophe weighed heavily on the shoulders of the survivors. Ignoring the panic of his subordinates, the old man silently walked forward, ready to accept the inevitable. He turned around only for a moment, leaving behind those who could no longer be saved. The remaining fugitives had no choice but to immediately seek an alternative route to salvation. But another deafening roar came from above, cutting off the last obvious exit. As they made their way through the dilapidated compartments, they felt the traps slamming shut. Attempts to activate defensive spells turned to dust. The mana in the air became completely uncontrollable. At that moment, people running towards them started screaming in panic, warning of a new mortal danger. From the clouds of billowing poisonous smoke, a gigantic figure emerged before them. A terrifying demonic orc appeared before the defenseless scientists, its body emitting an ominous green flame. The unfortunate explorers retreated back in horror, realizing the futility of their resistance. The monster's red eyes, burning with primal rage, stared mercilessly at the frightened people. With one swift and merciless movement, the creature brought down its blow on the defenseless victim. The deadly taint instantly entered the unfortunate man's body, triggering a terrible and irreversible process of mutation. Pain gripped his mind, and his body began to rapidly distort under the influence of dark power. The human form faded, giving way to a primal rage and lust for flesh. Having lost his mind, the newly converted monster rushed at his frightened colleague. He barely had time to scream in horror, realizing that there was nowhere left to run. But this was only the beginning of the nightmare. The filth instantly gave birth to a gigantic monster, and this huge creature raised its crushing fists over the girl frozen in shock. Watching what was happening, Kim Tae-young realized that he couldn't hesitate for even a second longer. A monstrous blow shook the laboratory, threatening to bury everyone under the rubble. At the last moment, the guy made an incredible dash, taking his defenseless ally out of the danger zone. The rescued girl could only stare at her savior in fascination, not believing her own eyes. He landed, shrouded in an ominous scarlet aura, ready to take on the inevitable challenge. A frightening, blood-red glint of his true power shone through Kim Tae-young's cracked glasses. Meanwhile, the bodies of the remaining scientists also began to rapidly deform, joining the ranks of the monsters. Having assessed the scale of the new threat, the guy gestured to his partner to stay behind. There was no longer a drop of fear left in his gaze, only cold calculation and awakening anger. A powerful surge of energy drew an invisible line, dividing the battlefield. Without wasting any time, Kim Tae-young rushed forward to meet the enemy, who was superior in strength. With one precise and crushing blow, he brought down all his power on the giant. Even after such a violent collision, his face retained an absolute, chilling calm. He landed confidently on his feet, ready to go through this crazy path of survival to the end. The sudden appearance of the monster sows chaos and panic among those who thought themselves safe. Kim Tae-young quickly dodges, assessing the scale of the new threat. A powerful blow sends his opponents flying, causing the walls of the laboratory to shake. But instead of running, the young man calmly analyzes the damage he has received. Through the clouds of dust, the eerie silhouette of a monster emerges, thirsting for more blood. Kim Tae-young's gaze is directed straight at him, and excitement flashes in his eyes. He fearlessly takes a step towards the giant, engulfed in poisonous green flame. Streams of alien energy rush straight towards him, making him hold his breath. A powerful explosion tears through space, hiding everything that is happening in an impenetrable curtain. The witness of this madness barely manages to protect her face from flying fragments and suffocating smoke. Fearing the worst, she tries to see through the settling dust. The tension in the air becomes almost palpable as the storm begins to subside. Fear grips her body at the thought of what power has just awakened in this twilight. In the silence that follows, the young man's face remains motionless, like a mask. But the very next moment, his lips spread into a predatory, triumphant smile. With one swift dash, he closes in on the monster, imposing his will. His palm lands on the enemy's distorted face, releasing destructive power. A lightning-fast, crushing movement puts a final end to this confrontation. A piercing roar of agony echoes through the ruins as the monster shatters into pieces, and only the silent witness continues to look at him, realizing that a real monster stands before her. Leaving behind only mountains of dust, Kim Tae-hyung takes a leisurely step forward, adjusting his glasses. The witness of this triumph freezes in silent awe, not believing her own eyes. There's a subtle grin on his face, the grin of a predator who knows exactly his next move. At the same time, deep underground, in a securely protected bunker, those who considered themselves masters of the situation are watching what is happening. Elder Chang Mong, confident in the invincibility of his walls, only turns condescendingly to the guards. Subordinates listen to their master's every word, ready to defend this stronghold until their last breath. The old man slowly strokes his long beard, sincerely believing that not a single living soul will be able to penetrate his sanctuary. Although his men try to remain calm, a subtle uneasiness is already beginning to brew within their ranks. But Changlong merely dismisses their concerns, arrogantly declaring the superiority of his technology. After all, these thick defensive barriers were designed to withstand the onslaught of even the strongest players in this world. Pride clouds the old master's mind, causing him to believe in absolute security. However, at that very moment, a powerful impulse runs through the entire complex, causing the very foundations of the building to tremble. Mild bewilderment gives way to mounting horror as the guards realize the scale of the approaching threat. A second later, the ceiling shatters into thousands of pieces under the onslaught of colossal destructive force. Through clouds of dust and a flurry of debris, enveloped in an ominous crimson aura, an uninvited guest rushes down. Kim Tae-hyung lands dramatically in front of the stunned defenders, causing the air around him to thicken with bloodlust. That same crazy smile blossoms on his face again, promising quick retribution for all past grievances. His right eye glows with a scarlet flame, revealing the true, terrifying nature of this monster. Changlong grits his teeth in rage, realizing that his perfect plan has once again been destroyed to the ground. But he doesn't even have time to scream when the Mad Hunter rushes into his final attack. A crushing blow comes down from above, ready to crush the stubborn enemy where he stands. But Changlong instantly unleashes a stream of blinding energy, trying to seize the initiative. The collision of two colossal forces shakes space itself, generating a destructive blast wave. Taehyung loses his balance for a second, surprised by the unexpected force of the resistance. Taking advantage of the pause, the old man delivers a counterblow, driving his opponent into the ground. However, Taehyung deftly rolls in midair and lands on his feet, ready to continue the fight. His demonic gaze grows even brighter, thirsting for real blood. At this moment, Changlong begins to emit an ominous electric glow, transforming before our eyes. A colossal, ghostly avatar materializes behind him, embodying his true superiority. Taehyung instinctively takes a defensive stance, realizing the scale of the threat. The elder looks down on his hands filled with power, reveling in his own invincibility. With a bitter smile, he admits that the pathetic bug still forced him to release this hidden trump card. Mockingly sending the youth off to rest, he rushes into a swift attack, leaving no chance for salvation. The speed of his attack is incredible, and it seems that it is simply impossible to dodge this devastating whirlwind. But a sly, triumphant smile suddenly appears on Kim Tae-hyung's face. At the very last moment, he activates hidden energy threads that wrap around the enemy's arm. Changlong attempts to deliver the finishing blow, but his movements are suddenly hindered by an invisible barrier. With horror, he realizes that his former great strength is rapidly leaving his body, leaking through his fingers. The shining bonds tighten ever more, paralyzing the remnants of his power and causing his fingers to tremble. Kim Tae-hyung only looks condescendingly at his defeated opponent, realizing that the outcome of this game was predetermined from the very beginning. But the sudden appearance of an ally instantly changes the balance of power on the battlefield. Yoshikawa Surawa appears with his signature unperturbed smile, apologizing for the slight delay. The mutilated bodies of the guards on the steps eloquently testify to how difficult her path to this monastery was. She chats casually with Kim Tae-hyung, as if they had met on a casual walk and not in the middle of a mortal fight. Her confidence borders on slight arrogance, because for her this outcome was obvious from the very beginning. Kim Tae-hyung only smiles slightly, pleased that everything is going exactly according to his plan. However, the fettered Geo Tevuek is not going to accept its fate so easily. Gathering the last crumbs of his once great power, he explodes with a furious cry, trying to break the restraining shackles. The air around trembles from the released energy, threatening to destroy all living things within a radius of several meters. The hunters watch this death throes with cold curiosity, amazed by his astonishing resilience. For them, this is nothing more than an annoying delay that needs to be resolved as quickly as possible in order to complete the mission. A desperate GOTEVUA launches a final suicidal attack, driven only by a blind thirst for revenge. Yoshikawa Surara calmly raises her hand, ready to stop this daring attempt with one precise spell. But Kim Tae-young is faster. With a lightning-fast stroke, his dark magic deprives the enemy of all hope, cutting off his hand in a fountain of blood. The young man's movements are imperceptible to the naked eye, his silhouette momentarily merging completely with the shadows. Like a predatory beast sensing the weakness of its hunted prey, he rises into the air, ready to deliver a crushing blow. Crimson flashes of merciless claws cut through space, leaving the enemy no chance of escape. Goteeuek only has time to freeze in mute horror in the face of inevitable and imminent death. The final, deadly blow breaks the silence of the hall, putting a bold end to this protracted duel. And even Yoshikawa Surara, who has seen a lot, is frozen in amazement by the chilling cruelty with which Kim Tae-hyun finished this fight. But Kim Tae-young doesn't even think about relaxing, because he clearly feels that the real threat is still lurking somewhere nearby. A sudden flash of monstrous intent makes him turn around sharply, but it turns out to be almost impossible to react in time. A new enemy, crushing and merciless, attacks from behind with incredible, unnatural speed. A stunned Yoshikawa Surara struggles to keep her balance as she tries to recover from the shockwave of this sudden collision. Another deadly strike, carrying pure destructive power, cuts through the air with a whistle. Kim Tae-hyung takes the full brunt of the blow, managing to block it a second before impact. The space-distorting shockwave throws the boy back, causing him to grit his teeth in piercing pain. Through the beads of cold sweat on his face, one can see furious resistance, but the forces in this fight are too unequal. The monster merely smugly demonstrates its instant regeneration, declaring that any human attacks against it are absolutely useless. His mad, booming laughter echoes throughout the hall, emphasizing his complete superiority over the defeated hunter. An exhausted Kim Tae-hyung drops to one knee, breathing heavily and trying to hold on to his slipping consciousness. Looking down on the wounded youth, the enemy recognizes his outstanding talent, but considers his fate already sealed. Tae-young slowly raises his head, and a wild, unbridled spark flashes in his eyes that no wound can break. It is the look of a predator who refuses to admit defeat, even when he is on the very edge of the abyss. The enemy condescendingly explains that all this vaunted national-level status is just empty words. After all, true greatness, according to him, is accessible only to those who have sworn allegiance to the emperor himself. The monster makes Tae-hyung a generous offer to surrender and become his loyal comrade, recognizing his unique strength. But the guy just gets closer, promising to knock all this pompous nonsense out of the head of the arrogant bastard. Yoshikawa Surara, watching helplessly, can only reach out to him in fear, sensing an imminent catastrophe. And then the hall trembles with the awakening of the primordial nightmare. Tae-hyung's crimson flame bursts out to destroy the impudent enemy once and for all. Tae-hyung, whose gaze now glows crimson, points at his enemy, giving him the death sentence. A huge crimson dragon, the embodiment of his fury, opens its mouth over the doomed enemy. The realization of imminent death catches up with the enemy too late, leaving only a silent question in his eyes. The once arrogant old man falls helplessly into the abyss of the blazing maw, devoured by the primordial flame. All his ambitions and deals with the powers of the underworld turn into absolute nothing in the blink of an eye. But before Tae-hyung could celebrate his victory, a new, much more sinister silhouette silently emerged behind him. Feeling the deadly breath, the young man turns around sharply, ready to repel a sudden attack. The creature spews a poisonous stream of green flame, forcing Tae-hyung to step out of the way at the last moment. Deftly dodging the deadly jet, he regains his balance and frantically assesses the situation. The caustic acid hisses as it hits the floor, instantly burning through the hall's strongest slabs. A terrifying creature, woven from green otherworldly energy, spread its wings majestically in the air. The surrounding area shakes from the destructive power of the monster, knocking everyone present off their feet. Poisonous spray mercilessly maims people, sowing panic and cries of pain in the dilapidated building. Another deadly stream rushes straight towards the defenseless Yoshikawa Surara. The girl closes her eyes in horror, awaiting the inevitable and painful death. The winged executioner is ready to celebrate his triumph, watching his doomed victim. However, Tae-hyung makes a lightning-fast dash forward, shielding his ally from certain death. He picks up Surara in the air, trying to pull her out of the blast zone. Landing hard, the guy shields her with his body from the boulders that fall from above. And now, huddled together among the ruins, they are forced to once again look up at the merciless enemy hovering above them. This mysterious adversary, hiding his face behind a lifeless mask, exudes a primal menace. Using a terrifying virus, this monster is able to subjugate crowds of innocent people to its will, turning them into mindless puppets. Now his chilling gaze is directed straight at the survivors trapped in the narrow passage. Ricky Harley's gently touches his companion's shoulder, silently urging her to maintain her composure. He resolutely shields to it his body, making it clear that he will not allow the enemy to shed another drop of blood. His eyes glow with an unwavering readiness to go to the very end, no matter what the cost. The girl, exhausted by the fight, only looks at him silently, realizing what an unbearable burden he is taking upon himself. She tries to stop him, but her desperate gesture is powerless against his steely determination. The enemy, however, soars in the heights, absolutely confident in his undeniable superiority. But Ricky is not about to back down from this ruthless force. The monster swoops down like lightning, intending to finish off the daring humans with one crushing blow. The young man doesn't even flinch, calmly waiting for the perfect moment to counterattack. The next moment, the air is pierced by scarlet flashes of awakened magic. The violent blast wave causes the monster to stagger and recoil. A colossal fire dragon materializes from the crimson mist behind the magician, ready to incinerate everything in its path. Ricky Harley's unleashes his pent-up power, preparing to deliver the finishing blow. Behind him, an exhausted girl slowly sinks down the cold steps of the ruins. She looks in fascination at the incredible power that the young man had hidden from everyone until this moment. Leaving her safe, Ricky moves forward to face his greatest and most dangerous battle. All she can do is watch him go, silently wiping away tears mixed with dust and blood. Kim Tae-hyung understands perfectly well that his comrades will have a hard time until he returns to duty. Enemy attacks rain down in an endless stream of crimson, forcing you to dodge to the limit of human strength. The protective barriers collapse with a roar, unable to contain the fury of the summoned ancient beast. At that moment, a winged monster silently emerges from the shadows, raising its deadly claws above the hunter's head. But when the danger becomes mortal, an ominous golden light flashes in Tae-hyung's eye, awakening hidden reserves. Leaning back, he calls upon the primal fury of the Crimson Dragon to his aid. The monstrous mouth opens, concentrating a colossal amount of destructive energy. A searing stream of flame falls upon the enemy, burning out all the space around it. Tae-hyung breathes heavily, knowing that this fight requires his absolute concentration and full dedication. Gritting his teeth, he rushes forward again, driven by the thirst for victory and the fury of battle. His faithful dragon roars, preparing to deliver the decisive, crushing blow. However, the enemy responds with an incredibly powerful green slash that cuts through space itself. The hunter realizes with annoyance that the enemy is once again resorting to his most insidious and dangerous technique. But there is nowhere to retreat. Tae-hyung makes a sharp lunge, putting all his anger into this movement. Two colossal forces collide in mid-air, creating a terrifying chaos of magic and dust. Surrounding himself with a protective vortex, he tries to contain the blast wave that is bursting outward. His every move is filled with pure primordial power, capable of wiping cities off the face of the earth. The walls of the fortified complex cannot withstand such pressure and begin to become covered with glowing cracks. A deafening explosion shakes everything around, completely destroying the battlefield. Finding himself amidst the ruins and settling dust, Tae-hyung prepares for the next round of this endless war. Weakened but not broken, Tae-hyung tries to gather bits of energy from the smoldering debris. He stares into the silent void, wondering if the battle is truly over. But before the dust settles, a creepy silhouette materializes out of thin air right behind him. Tae-hyung freezes in shock, realizing that the Emperor's elite servant survived his powerful attack. The enemy does not give time to respite and immediately goes on a furious offensive. From a sharp, crushing attack, the young man falls, choking on the blood that has risen to his throat. The monster's iron fingers tighten around his neck, cutting off his oxygen supply. But even at this critical moment, the fierce fire of resistance does not fade in Tae-hyung's eyes. The creature only squeezes the throat harder, enjoying the helplessness of its victim. A terrible grin spreads across the monster's faceless head, foreshadowing imminent reprisal. Tae-hyung feels his own body begin to turn to stone under the influence of someone else's magic. Yes, his consciousness is momentarily carried away into a cold, silent abyss on the border between life and death. But he is no stranger to such torture, and in response to the suffocation he summons the beast's crimson aura. The monster only laughs mockingly, considering these desperate efforts a waste of time. It revels in triumph, absolutely confident in the superiority of its dark magic. Concentrating its poisonous energy, the monster prepares to end the life of the daring hunter once and for all. A greenish glow envelops Tae-hyung, restricting his movements and draining the last of his strength. But, contrary to the enemy's expectations, the young man begins to laugh quietly through a choking cough. And at that very second, a colossal crimson dragon materializes behind him. Every drop of stolen power comes back, turning a deadly trap into Tae-hyung's triumph. Tae-hyung's eyes flash with a thirst for imminent reprisal. It absorbs the colossal amount of released magic, causing its stats to grow at an insane rate. Before him appears an ugly messenger of darkness, confident of his impunity. This monster is ready to tear apart anyone who stands in its way. But Tae-hyung only grins condescendingly, anticipating the upcoming fun. From the crimson flame behind his back, the furious face of a gigantic dragon was woven. The creature barely has time to realize the danger emanating from this primordial power. In the blink of an eye, a furious stream of crimson energy engulfs the intruder entirely. Upon waking up, the monster realizes that he has found himself in a completely different, sinister dimension. Before him lay a terrifying throne room, built from the bones of defeated enemies. Looking around in confusion, he tries to understand where fate has led him. At the top of this terrifying pedestal sits one whose power surpasses all imagination. This is the king, in whose scarlet eyes one can read only the deepest contempt for the insignificant stranger. However, the impudent creature refuses to acknowledge the greatness of the master of these lands. At the same moment, red-hot ghostly chains tightly restrain the monster's movements. Trying to release his poisonous aura, the captive arrogantly declares his own invincibility. He is convinced that there are no shackles in this world that can contain his primordial rage. A flash of destructive emerald flame was supposed to tear the dungeon to pieces. But the king does not even move, allowing the senseless storm to crash against the foot of his greatness. The true ruler only reveals a grain of his true will, causing the impudent stranger to shudder with primal horror. The ancient monster cannot believe his eyes as he finds himself trapped in flaming crimson shackles. A deadly force restricts his movements, depriving him of any hope of salvation. But in a desperate attempt to escape, the creature rushes forward, overcoming inhuman pain. A final, furious thrust causes the very foundations of this dungeon to shake with primal power. However, the mysterious enemy only grins, anticipating the long-awaited triumph over the defeated enemy. At the same time, outside, in the thick silence of the night, anxiety is growing, forcing the strongest defenders to become wary. The fifth most powerful hunter of the great power feels icy sweat running down his face from the premonition of an unknown threat. He remembers his duty to protect Ricky Harley's, a key figure in the international association whose authority is unquestionable. Not long before this, the proud warrior had resolutely rejected any support, confident in her own strength. Her gaze was full of firm determination to complete this dangerous mission alone. But the hours of agonizing anticipation drag on, and ominous waves of distorted energy begin to emanate from the depths of the laboratory. Unable to remain idle any longer, he takes off running towards a crushing gust of wind. Through the dust and rubble, a wounded but still fighting Ricky Harley steps towards him. Overcoming his fear, the faithful comrade rushes towards her, trying to discern the scale of the tragedy. The exhausted girl falls into his arms, tears and blood mixing on her face. In a barely audible voice, she whispers about the terrifying secrets of this cursed place, where living people were turned into monsters. A horrific scene of carnage unfolds before their eyes. The sinister lair is strewn with the bodies of those they failed to save. The realization of the scale of the disaster leaves the experienced fighter paralyzed with anger and helplessness. But through the pain, Ricky Harless finds the strength to declare that in this abyss of nightmare, there is still hope for one person to be saved. And that name falls from her lips like a death sentence, the treacherous player Kim Tae-young, who still lurks within. But even experienced hunters were not prepared for what awaited them in the depths of this sinister dungeon. The air suddenly shakes with a crushing roar, and the ancient walls begin to crumble before our eyes. A heavy, suffocating presence fills the hallway, causing the allies to freeze in silent daze. A blinding whirlwind of primordial, uncontrollable magic erupts right in front of them, and from this raging flame, a monstrous abyss of horrors will pour forth, thirsting only for blood. Without a moment's hesitation, the loyal partner shields Ricky Harley's, preparing to take the blow himself. A glowing arsenal of ghostly weapons materializes in his hands, ready to unleash a barrage of fire on his enemies. Deadly beams of light cut through the gloom, trying to hold back the onslaught of the unstoppable horde. Through the roar of battle, the man screams, trying to understand why Ricky even got involved with this madman Kim Tae-young. After all, in such chaos, an ordinary person simply had no chance of surviving. The creatures are advancing from all sides, filling every free centimeter of this damned hall. Gathering his last strength, the defender rushes forward, desperately trying to buy at least a few seconds for Ricky. But the giant monsters are raging, overwhelming resistance with their incredible, primal power. And at this critical moment, the shadow of an overwhelming fear hangs over the wounded Ricky. Hurtmer's cry of despair is drowned out by the general din as the situation finally gets out of control. A huge monster with glowing scarlet eyes stretches out its terrible claws towards the girl. Captured by a heavy aura, she finds herself trapped in a death trap with no room to maneuver. It seems that this is the end, and even the strongest warriors are ready to admit their inevitable defeat. But when hope fades, that same Kim Tae-young falls from the heavens like a punishing lightning bolt, and a triumphant smile blossoms on Ricky's lips. Her faith in his return was fully justified. The deadly venom is defeated, and the battlefield resounds with the news of the enemy's crushing defeat. With the cold glint of his blade, Kim Tae-young turns his gaze to the survivors, ready to end their lives without mercy. Shots pierce the gloom, blinding flashes creating gaps in the ranks of the advancing monsters. Another moment, and all of Asia would have plunged into the abyss of an inevitable and large-scale catastrophe. But all this chaos, threatening the world, was able to be contained by the will of only one man. Golden chains woven from pure rage mercilessly drag even the most terrifying creatures of the abyss along with them. The headquarters of the planet's greatest associations watch his every move with bated breath. Ordinary people on the streets cannot tear their eyes away from their screens, captivated by this incredible battle. The entire world, divided by borders and flags, unites in a common feeling of awe before an unprecedented force. In high places, leaders of the world realize that the balance of power on Earth has changed forever. After all, from now on, Kim Tae-young personally raised a new peak of power, stepping beyond the limits of human capabilities. But while the world celebrates victory, in another crimson corner of the planet, the silence is broken by an ominous splash of footsteps. From the fog of war emerges a masked figure, his merciless eyes glowing with an otherworldly fire. Amidst the fallen titans and destruction, a wounded warrior breathes heavily on top of a fallen dragon. Ricky Harleys feels his strength draining away and his blood mixing with beads of cold sweat. But even through the unbearable pain, a weak, dismissive smile appears on his face. The mysterious ally silently assesses the scale of the bloody massacre that has taken place here. With the last of his strength, Ricky walks past him, placing his hand heavily on his comrade's shoulder in a sign of silent recognition. He walks away into the crimson mist, leaving behind only a trail of past battles and unsolved secrets. And only a silent look after a departing friend confirms, this war is still very far from over. The stranger's face is distorted by an ambiguous, mysterious smile, foreshadowing new changes. As if knowing some hidden truth, he eagerly awaits the moment when all the cards will be revealed. But while these secrets lie dormant, the action moves to a distant island, completely cut off from the rest of the world. In this quiet corner, far from the chaos of battle, a mysterious companion enjoys long-awaited peace. However, our hero is in no hurry to relax, maintaining his usual vigilance even in moments of respite. Their meeting on the sun-drenched terrace looks more like a resort holiday than a serious conversation. Looking into the endless expanse of the sea, he tries to find answers to the questions that torment him. Moreover, his interlocutor holds a high position as an inspector in the World Players Association. Her visit here is directly connected to the investigation of terrible events of the past and secret experiments on people. She understands perfectly well the emotional trauma these events cause to those who tried to help the victims. The hero himself realizes that in this reality, events are developing according to a much more favorable scenario. Trying to distract himself from the difficult memories, he takes a sip and returns to the present. But the peaceful atmosphere instantly evaporates when a determined Lim Ai-yong suddenly appears on the terrace. Caught off guard by the ambiguous scene, she cannot cope with the overwhelming emotions. The hero is simply perplexed as to why his conversation alone with the inspector affected her so much. A confused Lim Ai-yu tries to justify herself, comically becoming embarrassed under their intense gaze. The situation becomes even more awkward when it turns out that the entire area was rented out for this meeting. Watching this funny squabble, the association representative only smiles warmly. However, it's time to put the fun aside. Time is precious, and it's time to move on to their main unfinished business. After all, this secluded corner should become the ideal and safe base for the realization of their grandiose plan. Finding themselves at a dizzying height, they finally ask themselves the main question: why did they need this isolated place? Kim Tae-hyung takes a confident step forward, as the bonds and skill seal that had been holding him back have finally fallen. But a sudden surge of wild, unstable power makes him shudder with unbearable tension. An alien will is bursting out, trying to absorb his mind and completely take over his weakened body. However, it is too late to retreat. Kim Tae-hyung is determined to end this threat before a real catastrophe begins. Yoshikawa Surara is well aware of the danger of the situation, warning of a possible devastating explosion. This mental explosion risks not only destroying everything around them, but also permanently depriving them of their sanity. Surara's gaze betrays growing anxiety in the face of the unpredictable elements. The only chance for salvation is to combine all their forces to contain Tae-hyung's unleashing power. Yet his true motives and hidden plans remain an unsolved mystery to his allies. But even one step away from the abyss, his companion finds the strength for a carefree and easy smile. Behind this outward frivolity lies an unshakable faith in his success. She is confident that they can cope with any madness that fate has in store for them. Kim Tae-hyung turns away, mentally preparing himself for what he must do alone. Taking a deep breath, he takes out his phone, giving a silent signal to begin the dangerous experiment. An ominous crimson glow flashes across the dark screen, heralding the awakening of an ancient power. The forbidden spell slips from his lips, setting in motion the irreversible process of fusion. At that very moment, his ghostly essence separates from the physical shell, leaving the material world behind. Kim Tae-hyung's consciousness is rapidly sinking into the depths of a crimson, seething subconscious. And stepping onto the shaky surface of the bloody ocean, he understands that this risky choice was absolutely correct. Before him rises a monumental staircase of bones, leading to a majestic throne at the very peak of this eerie place. At the top, a mysterious owner awaits him, a frightening reflection of Kim Tae-hyung himself with a burning, mad gaze. Faced with his darker half, the young man feels no fear, only cold determination. He firmly demands an answer, wanting to know the true nature of the one who is hiding behind this mask. But the one sitting on the bone throne only smirks arrogantly in response, reveling in his absolute power over this space. Realizing that there will be no peaceful words, Kim Tae-hyung takes a confident step forward, causing the bloody waves to shudder. The tension between them grows with each passing second, turning their mental space into a powder keg. He clenches his fists firmly and issues a harsh ultimatum, demanding that his mind and body be freed immediately. The demonic double is only further provoked by these threats, anticipating a funny and cruel resistance. Then Kim Tae-hyung rushes into a swift attack, ready to throw out the intruder by force. But the monster instantly leaps from its pedestal towards him, releasing its claws towards the daring hunter. Their palms collide in a crushing grip, unleashing the primal fury of two equal forces. The collision creates a colossal explosion, tearing the crimson skies of the subconscious apart. A raging hurricane of pure energy floods everything around, erasing the boundaries of the mind in a blinding flash. At that very moment, in the real world, the laboratory's solid walls begin to shake under incredible pressure. Feeling a frightening vibration, Yoshikawa Surara looks around in confusion, trying to comprehend the scale of the threat. Her gaze freezes in horror as she realizes the terrifying power that is being unleashed right now. Kim Tae-hyung's frozen body is enveloped in ominous smoke, marking the end of the internal struggle for control. The solid metal floor beneath his feet begins to collapse with a deafening crash. And the next moment, a crushing impulse of released magic destroys everything in its path, heralding the birth of a new, unrivaled power. A devastating blast wave spreads out in all directions, causing the arena's solid floor to shake. Realizing the gravity of the situation, the allies quickly regroup, preparing for the worst. But they have no time to think, because the enemy is already rushing forward, shrouded in an ominous aura. Furious clash occurs instantly, and the battle erupts with new, frightening force. In the crimson haze, the grin of a monstrous beast materializes, ready to devour everything in its path. And yet Kim Tae-hyung doesn't even flinch in the face of this colossal threat. On the contrary, his face is distorted by the same condescending, confident smile. Two furious vortices of energy lock in a deadly dance, causing the air to literally melt. The enemy strikes blow after blow, trying to crush the insolent one with his overwhelming power. But Tae-hyung only coldly dodges, calculating every step of this madman in advance. The predatory grin on his face foreshadows a quick and inevitable denouement. A gigantic ghostly blade, bringing death, materializes directly above the head of the stunned enemy. His wide-open eyes are frozen in primal terror in the face of inevitable fate. An invisible hand grips the hilt of a colossal sword, ready to carry out the death sentence. A sharp blade falls from top to bottom with a deafening whistle, cutting through space. Scarlet drops rise up, painting the battlefield in the colors of imminent defeat. A crushing blow hits the target, eliciting a hoarse groan of pain from the enemy. A powerful stream of magical blood literally blows him back, depriving him of any opportunity to defend himself. Tae-hyung's gaze remains completely calm. For him, this outcome was obvious from the very first second. And now, his hand shrouded in the purple glow of destructive magic, he rushes forward to put an end to this confrontation. However, his opponent is in no hurry to give up, sliding with the last of his strength along the crimson surface and trying to avoid the inevitable blow. But Tae-hyung is only amused by this. The mad fire in his eyes is growing brighter, foreshadowing imminent reprisal. In this bloody arena, the outcome is predetermined, and Tae-hyung's overwhelming superiority becomes obvious to every witness. Even the mighty demon Hazard is forced to acknowledge the strength of this man, who is able to easily defeat enemies beyond all reasonable limits. The confrontation continues, but the cornered opponent already clearly understands that a true monster stands before him. Tae-hyung's gaze, blazing with scarlet madness, is directed straight at his victim, leaving her no chance of salvation. The next moment, giant ghostly chains pierce the battlefield, seeking to bind and suppress Tae-hyung. But he doesn't even think about dodging, cold-bloodedly watching the enemy's futile attempts to contain his crushing force. Clenching his fist, Tae-hyung concentrates a colossal amount of energy, ready to break any shackles in an instant. An arrogant smirk plays across his face again. This battle is being fought entirely by his own rules. At the same moment, Yoshikawa Surara watches what is happening in horror, realizing the colossal scale of the force that Tae-hyung simply called an explosion. However, her companion is not going to sit idle and releases her own sparkling lightning magic. Enveloped in an ominous crimson aura, Tae-hyung continues to slowly advance, paralyzing the will of his enemies with his mere presence. The tension in the air is building to the limit. It seems that in just one more moment, this insane power will crush everything around into dust. Realizing that the slightest delay would result in disaster, the girls exchange quick, determined glances. In a single impulse, they rush into the attack, trying to curb this out-of-control hurricane of destruction. But Surara's furious attack meets an insurmountable obstacle when Tae-hyung easily intercepts her hand. Shrouded in demonic flame, he towers over them like an impenetrable wall, suppressing any attempts at resistance. A desperate leap and a powerful slashing blow with a spear from above should have turned the tide of this mad fight. But the formidable weapon instantly freezes in the air, forcing Surara to realize the futility of their fight against this monster. The green flames of her rage flare up with renewed vigor as Surara refuses to accept her inevitable defeat. Through pain and fatigue, she rushes forward again, turning her body into a living projectile. A deadly spear falls upon the enemy from above, carrying within it all the accumulated power of her crushing will. But Kim Tae-hyung doesn't even flinch, only slightly lowering his gaze with his usual arrogant calm. With a flick of his wrist, he quenches the devastating attack, creating a blinding flash of pure energy. Tensions reach fever pitch as their powers clash in a silent duel of endurance. Surara feels her hands tremble under his unwavering pressure, her former confidence melting before her eyes. Tae-hyung looks at her with a slight grin, ready to finally crush her resistance with one movement of his finger. A sharp break in distance, and Surara raises his weapon again, trying to find at least one gap in his absolute defense. The blade of her spear cuts through the air, leaving behind only a ghostly green trail. But the enemy moves too quickly, dodging every swing with the frightening grace of a predator. Before she can regroup, Tae-hyung strikes back with a swift and merciless strike. A powerful kick sends her flying, breaking her well-ordered defense and draining her last strength. Surara lands heavily, but stubbornly grips the shaft of his spear, preparing to fight to the very end. But even the enemy's superior force is not able to stop the preparation of their decisive trump card. Iuaun calmly summons ancient magic, causing the heavens to tremble with accumulated energy. In her palm, unstable plasma is concentrated, ready to burst out in a devastating storm. A blinding blue flash instantly fills the entire battlefield, distorting reality itself around it. Yue-yong stands motionless against the backdrop of this raging grandeur, ready to deliver one crushing blow. And Surara, seizing this moment, rushes forward again so as not to give his opponent a single chance of salvation. Kim Tae-hyung can barely contain the onslaught, feeling the ground slipping out from under his feet under the weight of his opponent's monstrous pressure. A furious cry breaks the silence hanging in the air, heralding the beginning of a devastating collision. A warrior dives down from the sky, ready to pierce reality itself with his glittering spear. But at the same moment, the battlefield shakes, and colossal, living roots burst forth from the depths of the earth. Ancient magic awakens, weaving through the space and forcing attackers to retreat in the face of an unknown threat. Watching this chaos, those present try with bated breath to comprehend the scale of the madness that is taking place. In the midst of this natural vortex stands Ricky Harleys, whose true power is finally revealed to the world through the opening portal. With a chilling smile, she unleashes monsters of the abyss, ready to devour anyone who dares to stand in her way. The merciless bonds instantly reach their target, restricting Kim Tae-hyung's movements and slowly beginning to suck out his life energy. Those around can only watch in mute shock at this overwhelming, irresistible power. After all, before them is a legendary national hunter who rightfully occupies second place in the ranking of the strongest. Tae-hyung clenches his fists desperately, trying to resist the strangling grip of the deadly plants. However, the pressure only increases, and it seems that his strength is finally leaving his exhausted body. The alarmed cries of his comrades echo across the battlefield, but hope for salvation fades with every second. Ricky Harleys looked closely at his captive, anticipating the inevitable and quick victory. But suddenly, a blinding crimson flash pierces the space, destroying the usual course of the battle. The mighty warrior's face twists in genuine horror as she realizes that her perfect trap has been destroyed in an instant. The deadly roots crumble to dust, revealing an unharmed Tae-hyung standing at his full height. Ricky's desperate attempt to regain control of the situation only leads to growing panic in the face of real danger. Tae-hyung indifferently shakes off the remnants of someone else's magic, making it clear that this fight is just beginning. The tension in the air becomes palpable as Yoshikawa Surara realizes that the man standing before her is not the same as the one she knew. Kim Tae-hyung only grins ominously, demonstrating a frightening superiority and playfully destroying the remnants of others' illusions. Confusion turns to rage, because she must immediately find out what evil force has taken over his mind. But there is no hint of the old doubts in his eyes, only a cold, merciless emptiness. Surara once again concentrates his raging, sparkling energy, preparing to deliver the finishing blow. Unleashing all her fury, she unleashes a barrage of lightning on her enemy, seeking to wipe that self-confident smile from his face. Powerful bolts of energy pierce the arena, threatening to destroy anyone in their path. However, Tae-hyung doesn't even try to dodge, accepting all this destructive power with absolute calm. A directed stream of sparks flows limply around his body, turning into a useless light show. The realization of reality hits Surara harder than any physical blow. Her strongest technique was blocked with her bare hands. Enjoying the despair of others, Tae-hyung envelops himself in an ominous crimson aura, anticipating imminent reprisal. With lightning speed, he strikes with a swift blow, causing the experienced huntress to completely lose control of the situation. Every breath she takes is a colossal effort, and her will to resist is melting away before her eyes. Grabbing her by the throat in a death grip, he easily lifts her defenseless body off the ground. For Tae-hyung, this battle turned out to be ridiculously easy, without bringing even a drop of the desired pleasure. At that very moment, someone's consciousness falls into an endless abyss of crimson nightmare, bound by scarlet chains. The bloody abyss pulls you to the very bottom, depriving you of any hope of salvation and return. There, in the depths of this spiritual kingdom, the majestic Igman sits silently, looking down on the pitiful human attempts to save themselves. The mind is torn apart by the incomprehension of how such a great power could turn into such a curse. But even at the very edge of the abyss, the will to live forces one to grit one's teeth and desperately cling to the elusive reality. Caught in a deadly grip, Yoshikawa Sarada tries in vain to remind her enemy of her high status, which now seems like an empty formality. But for Kim Tae-young, all human ranks and titles are nothing more than a funny illusion, meaningless in the face of true power. Easily lifting her above the ground, he revels in his own superiority and the helplessness of the one who was recently considered elite. However, at the most critical moment, his icy confidence wavers for a moment, giving way to sudden anxiety. Gathering her last shreds of willpower, the girl makes a desperate lunge, trying to escape from the suffocating captivity. Her gaze flares with a furious green flame, ready to burn away the remnants of fear and weakness. There is not a drop of sympathy on Kim Tae-young's face, only a cold shadow of growing irritation from such impudent resistance. With one sharp and merciless movement, he throws her hand away, not allowing her to go any further. The crippled body barely obeys, but through the veil of pain and blood on Sarara's face, a stubborn, defiant smile appears. The merciless blow sends her flying, causing the earth to shake under the weight of the merciless massacre. For him, she is nothing more than an annoying weed that must be torn out by the roots and trampled without a shadow of a doubt. Shaking off invisible dust, Kim Tae-young is genuinely indignant at the mere thought that such an insignificant creature dared to defile him with her touch. A crushing shockwave throws the wounded warrior away, leaving behind only a cloud of dust and debris. He turns around, expecting to see a lifeless body, forever silent in the darkness of the ruined hall. But contrary to logic and common sense, through coughing and wheezing, she stubbornly raises her head to meet her executioner. Realizing that this fight could be her last, Sarara begins to awaken the hidden reserves of her wounded mana source. Even Kim Tae-young freezes in amazement, feeling the air around him begin to vibrate from the colossal influx of energy. A dazzling azure whirlwind rushes upward, tearing apart space with its primordial, furious power. If this monster is destined to get out, the world will be plunged into chaos, which means she must stop it at any cost, no matter how terrible. The deadly radiance reaches its climax, and Yoshikawa Sarara unleashes the full force of his soul into this decisive, final blow. Gathering the last of his will, Yoshikawa Sarada unleashes a colossal torrent of icy energy capable of splitting the heavens themselves. A blinding azure beam pierces space, rushing straight towards the target with the inevitability of death itself. But Kim Tae-young doesn't even try to dodge, meeting this crushing wave with absolute frightening calm. The next moment, a merciless crimson maw opens from the darkness, swallowing the sacred light without a trace. Sarara freezes in disbelief as her greatest attack vanishes into a bloody mist. From the dissipating haze, the silhouette of an enemy emerges, whose ominous power has not weakened for a second. A mocking grin spreads across his face, revealing the futility of her desperate, valiant efforts. The realization of complete powerlessness presses the girl to the ground like a heavy burden, depriving her of the will to resist. Tae-young slowly walks forward, ready to reward his victim with a grisly reward for his brief entertainment. Sharp, crimson spines close around her body, threatening to turn the once proud warrior into an easy snack. A sadistic anticipation of triumph fills every gesture of the monster, raising his hand for the final massacre. But at the very last moment, a sudden flash of an alien, incredibly menacing aura makes him freeze. Reality around is distorted, and a powerful impulse from an unknown force falls directly on the self-confident monster. The defeated Sarara timidly looks up, seeing before her only the shadow of the one who covered her. A spark of timid hope, mixed with vague recognition, flashes in her eyes. Rage contorts Tae-young's face, his perfect victory just being rudely ruined. His mad cry tears through the space, demanding immediate retribution for his insolence. However, in response to his anger, an even more crushing, inexorable whirlwind of someone else's will descends. With difficulty holding back the pressure, Tae-young tries to cope with the sudden surge of pain. His eyes light up with an ominous flame, promising to turn this unexpected intervention into a real hell. The blood boils in his veins, and the mad grin only confirms that this fight is just beginning. There was nothing human left in his gaze, only a primal thirst for destruction. Realizing that the awakened power reacts to every mortal threat, Tae-young takes a step towards the abyss. The tension reaches its limit when the alien entity inside him demands complete submission, but he has no intention of becoming a spineless puppet in someone else's hands. It is better to accept death in battle than to let a monster take his mind and body. Dark flames envelop his silhouette, blurring the lines between man and demon. With a deafening roar, a colossal energy is released, capable of tearing apart space itself. Tae-young concentrates all this frantic power, preparing to deliver the decisive blow. A furious flash illuminates the battlefield with a crimson glow, consuming all living things around. From the very heart of this chaos, two scarlet flames blaze, thirsting for victory at any cost. A demonic whirlwind rushes upward, crushing the remnants of enemy resistance. As the storm subsides, Taehyung catches his breath, feeling the monstrous pressure finally ease. The crimson madness recedes, returning him to the real world, engulfed in cold silence. But it is too early to rejoice in victory. Taehyung's gaze falls on the motionless figure lying among the rubble. He rushes forward and gently hugs Ricky Harley's, trying to understand how severe his wounds are. Looking around the destroyed hall, Taehyung tries to comprehend the enormity of what happened. Opening his eyes with difficulty, the wounded youth whispers in surprise about the terrifying power that his savior had hidden for so long, and in those weakening eyes, one can read only sincere, quiet gratitude for salvation. The rescued woman, barely suppressing a weak smile, asks if it was really he who put an end to this nightmare. In response, the young man only squeezed her shoulders tighter, a reminder of the silent agreement when the time came she would have to repay this debt. There is no room for pity in his dark eyes, only cold calculation and a willingness to go all the way to achieve his goal. And this silent union is cemented in the silence of the ruined hall, where the dust of the battle gradually settles. After a while, the storm subsides and the soft morning sun floods the quiet hospital room, where the victims, having found themselves in complete safety, can finally allow themselves simple, human whims. Feeling an involuntary sense of guilt, the hero decides to personally take care of those who took the blow, and this unusual, quiet care helps the wounded to forget for a moment the horror they experienced. He himself, however, grumpily hides his warm feelings, assuring that this is only a one-time manifestation of his leniency. But within these walls, which temporarily sheltered them from external threats, a long-awaited peace reigns for a moment. Even behind closed doors, however, conversations inevitably return to the harsh realities of their dangerous trade. On the agenda is the World Players Association and the fact that the candidacy of the mysterious Ricky Harless has already been put forward at the highest level. For young hunters, this is a great chance to make a name for themselves and finally break into the international arena. But for the hero himself, all these loud titles, fame and recognition of the crowd are completely meaningless. He understands perfectly well that true power is exercised in the shadows, and he now sets the rules of this game himself. Meanwhile, the flags of the great powers convened for an emergency summit flutter above the association's headquarters. Powerful countries are pulling together their best representatives, anticipating an imminent redistribution of spheres of influence. The main conference hall is where those whose decisions can change the course of human history gather. Powerful leaders and elite hunters stand in tense anticipation, foreshadowing an inevitable clash of interests. And when the speaker begins his report, the hall trembles from the truth that they had to hide from the world for so long and so carefully. The speaker speaks from the podium about a new era, an era of players whose strength and potential surpass anything humanity has seen before. His voice rises to a shout, calling for acceptance of the inevitable and the release of new talent into the highest echelons of power. History is being made under the spotlight, and the eyes of hundreds of influential people are fixed on the stage in anticipation of great changes. One by one, those who have earned the right to be called the strongest defenders of this world rise onto the stage. The greatest names on the planet, living legends whose faces are etched into the memory of every survivor, are brought before the public. But among this established elite, someone is preparing to make his move who will change the rules of the game forever. Kim Tae-young buttons his jacket, ready to take on the challenge of fate as his name is loudly announced. The hall erupts in applause, recognizing the triumph of a young hunter whose journey is just beginning. Standing before this huge, jubilant crowd, he feels the full weight of responsibility that has fallen on his shoulders. His thoughts take him back to the past, full of endless struggle, mortal dangers, and cherished dreams of S-rank power. After all, before his regression, the limit of any mortal's dreams ended at the unattainable height of SS rank. And now before him lies what was worth going through all this hell for, the coveted artifact and the highest reward. But by receiving an official license, Kim Tae-hyung understands perfectly well that this is only the first step on his path. True goals lie far beyond human ranks, where gods, demons like Rosaria, and celestial beings like Igman collide. Hiding the card to his heart, he makes a silent promise to himself to surpass any imaginable limits. The solemn pathos of the ceremony is interrupted by a firm, friendly blow to the shoulder, bringing him back to reality. The older comrades are quick to express their sincere admiration, not hiding their pride for the new generation. Go Tae-wook steps closer to personally greet the rising star whose potential is visible to the naked eye. He openly admits that the association has high hopes for Kim Tae-hyung in this coming storm. And at that moment, surrounded by recognition and support, the young man understands. From now on, he is no longer alone in his war for the future. Suddenly, everyone's attention is drawn to the appearance of a mysterious guest, whose confident posture attracts the gaze of those present. With a slight, almost condescending smile, she casually greets those gathered as if she were the mistress of the situation. Step by step, one of the guests approaches her, ready to begin this subtle social game. Watching from the sidelines, Go Tae-wook shares his doubts, suspecting that behind this friendliness lies a calculated falsehood. But the conversation continues, shrouded in half-tones and hidden hints that are understandable only to the two of them. However, the smooth flow of the evening is interrupted by the heavy, confident tread of an approaching man. All eyes instantly turn to the one whose presence silences even the most seasoned masters of intrigue. A leisurely gesture, devoid of any pathos, reveals in him a man accustomed to commanding and subordinating others to his will. Introducing Cody Wood, an elite hunter whose cold, golden eyes radiate an unyielding strength. Kim Tae-young freezes, acutely feeling that now, having achieved the rank of SS, he finally stands on the same level as this living legend. Cody Wood's name has long been synonymous with absolute superiority, constantly appearing on the pages of world news. Behind him are countless scorched wastelands and victories in battles that seemed absolutely hopeless for humanity. He is the one who is used to looking death in the face alone, without knowing fear or doubt. And now Kim Tae-young takes the first step forward, extending his hand as a sign of sincere respect for the greatest warrior. This handshake marks the birth of an alliance that could radically change the balance of power in the coming confrontation. Cody Wood accepts the gesture with restraint but firmness, recognizing an equal and outlining the contours of a future joint struggle. Kim Tae-young responds with a confident smile, ready to share the burden of the coming battles and lead the people. But before this historic moment can end, the doors of the hall are thrown open with a bang. An out-of-breath messenger interrupts the celebration, demanding immediate attention to an urgent message that could ruin all plans. And from the anxious faces of Go Tae-wook and the others, it becomes clear, the news that has arrived does not bode well for the world. The idea of creating an unprecedented alliance of the planet's most powerful hunters instantly captures the attention of everyone in the room. The plan is ambitious, to assemble a single strike force of awakened SS-ranked units capable of clearing the last unexplored dungeons once and for all. A murmur of surprise runs through the ranks of guests. Rumors about the world power's readiness for such close cooperation turn out to be true. Powerful leaders, among whom the unwavering Cody Wood stands out, are ready to unite under a common banner for this great goal. Beautiful speeches about universal peace and final victory over monsters sound incredibly convincing and inspiring. However, behind this flawless screen, seasoned veterans immediately detect the falsehood, wondering about the hidden motives of the organizers. This too perfect coincidence of interests makes many wonder in whose hands this absolute power will end up. And while doubts may plague the mind, weaker states simply do not have the ability to dictate their terms to such formidable giants. To be left outside this alliance means being left alone to face the threats of the new world without any outside support. One after another, representatives of various associations rush to declare their agreement, afraid of missing out on a share of the future triumph. The speaker nods with satisfaction, watching as his grandiose plan effortlessly becomes reality. But just when a unanimous decision seems certain, another hand rises from the depths of the room. Lee Jung-jae takes a decisive step forward, drawing surprised glances from Cody Wood and the other delegates. This sudden gesture makes the allies of the Korean delegation literally freeze with a rising sense of alarm. The voice that followed finally destroys the illusion of universal agreement and noble unity. Kim Tae-young's bold statement makes it clear to everyone that he is not going to obey general rules and other people's plans. With a haughty smile on his face, he openly declares his intention to act solely in his own interests, away from the Union. Such a blatant challenge and unwillingness to play the role of an obedient pawn provoked a wave of genuine indignation among those gathered. For Korean officials, this stunt is turning into a real nightmare, threatening to destroy the precarious diplomatic balance. And Cody Wood's heavy, coldly irritated gaze makes it clear that the rebel will have to pay dearly for such insolence. Meanwhile, a private jet soars through the skies carrying witnesses to the brewing conflict away from the scene. Inside the luxurious cabin, a deceptive calm reigns, barely masking the passengers' nerves, which are stretched to the limit. Cody Wood's companion seems completely indifferent to what is happening and is resting peacefully in her chair. But this calm is fleeting. She opens her eyes and starts a conversation, testing the mood of her silent partner. Cody himself is deep in thought, and his stern profile does not promise his interlocutor an easy conversation. The woman only smiles slightly, finding particular pleasure in how seriously he takes the current situation. Looking out the window, she notices how rapidly the weather outside is changing. Her quiet voice sounds like an ominous prophecy that the real storm is yet to come. As if obeying her words, the liner crashes into a storm front where lightning rages and darkness swirls. The dangerous natural phenomenon only highlights the inner state of Cody Wood, whose eyes glow with a dangerous golden light. He clenches his fingers until they turn white, holding back the rage and thirst for action that is bursting out. In the semi-darkness of the salon, a heavy, palpable tension of two strong personalities hangs. Cody stares icy ahead, calculating every possible move his opponent will make. He is absolutely sure that very soon he will have the opportunity to personally teach the insolent man a lesson and regain his lost authority. Meanwhile, in the depths of the night city, on the upper floors of the headquarters, no less heated passions are flaring up. A furious slam of a fist on the table causes the office of a high-ranking official to shake. The head of the department is no longer willing to tolerate insolence that undermines the reputation of the entire organization. His face is distorted by a grimace of pure hatred. The shame must be washed away at any cost. Hastily pulling open a secret drawer of the desk, he reaches for what should become the decisive argument in this war. Clutching the coveted drive containing secret data, he prepares to deliver a crushing blow from which there is no recovery. He is already anticipating his unconditional victory, clutching the treasured accumulator in his fingers. But a sudden, barely perceptible rustle behind the door makes him suddenly freeze. Stifling, ominous premonition of disaster hangs in the deathly silence of the spacious office. Thick, crimson blood begins to ooze slowly and inexorably from under the locked doors. The chilling click of the lock echoes throughout the room, heralding the inevitable. The stranger coldly steps over the bodies of his personal guards, leaving them no chance of escape. A paralyzing fear grips the man, and the realization of his own helplessness appears on his face. Kim Tae-hyung stands tall on the threshold, ruthless and frighteningly calm in this sea of blood. His mocking, predatory gaze leaves no doubt this meeting will be the last for his victim. In the very heart of the metropolis, within the walls of a majestic skyscraper, a storm was brewing, ready to overturn the usual order of things. Yoshikawa Surara was furious, demanding an answer for such a bold and reckless statement. Even experienced mentors, accustomed to any upheaval, could not hide their anxiety in the face of the coming changes. The conversation in the silence of the spacious office became increasingly tense, revealing the gulf between their gazes. The girl desperately tried to understand what was hidden behind this mask of absolute composure. But Lee Jong-jae remained adamant, confident in his every word and action. She peered closely into his face, trying to catch even the slightest hint of doubt. He sat opposite, personifying a force that could not be bent or subjugated to someone else's will. At that moment, Surara realized that the rules of the game had changed once and for all. The confrontation between the two great powers reached a completely new level, where there was no room for compromise. One side was hungry for a crushing victory, ready to throw all its reserves into the battle. The other one held her ground unwaveringly, defending her principles until her last breath. And it was he, a simple guy at first glance, who was destined to find himself at the very epicenter of this destructive whirlwind. Surara couldn't believe her ears, amazed by the scale of his true intentions. His fearless gaze indicated that he had no intention of retreating. A dangerous light flashed in her eyes, an awakened interest in the one who dared to challenge fate. However, Lee Jong-jae's serious demeanor was instantly replaced by his usual, slightly confused smile. A heavy, almost tangible silence hung between them, full of unspoken words. He calculated each of his next steps because any mistake could be fatal. And, taking a calm sip, he made it clear that this game was just beginning. In response to her emotional questions and obvious displeasure, he merely remained imperturbable. Lee Jong-jae knew very well how to hurt her pride with just one cold look. Yoshikawa Sura froze, catching the hidden, frightening confidence in his words. His barely noticeable smile indicated that everything was going strictly according to his script. Realizing that arguing was pointless, the girl only sighed heavily and tried to regain her composure. But Lee Jong-jae had already taken complete control of this conversation, and although the mountain of unresolved problems still weighed heavily on them, the rules of the game had already changed. He gently but persistently led her to the thought from which she had been running for so long. Yoshikawa tried to object, explaining the complexity of their current situation. But deep down, she was already intrigued by this crazy, adventurous plan. Seeing her doubts, he leaned back in his chair, celebrating his small mental victory. The real challenges lay ahead, beyond the walls of this majestic skyscraper, where the mad fighters were already anticipating the imminent start of a real massacre. The strongest of the strongest, each with their own quirks and outsized egos. They were not used to obeying and saw those around them only as entertainment or potential victims. Finding herself among these monsters, Yoshikawa Surara immediately felt the danger emanating from them on her skin. The tension in the air could literally be cut with a knife, forcing her to barely contain her trembling. But suddenly all conversation died down, and the eyes of those present turned to the doors. Even the most arrogant of them sensed the approach of someone who was not inferior to them in strength. Stepping forward, Lee Jong-jae calmly voiced his main condition. From now on, they are one team. This statement made everyone present freeze in surprise. The group's leader merely smirked arrogantly, reminding them of the true balance of power. After all, for such formidable fighters accustomed to the top, the newcomer's proposal sounded like a daring joke. But Lee Jong sees he had no intention of backing down, and a subtle, confident smile appeared on his face. His aura instantly filled the training hall, causing the elite hunters to involuntarily take a step back. Yoshikawa Tsur, stunned by the sudden onslaught, felt her heart beat faster. She looked away shyly, ready to give in to this strange but irresistible attraction. However, the young man hastened to clarify his intentions, showing that there was cold calculation behind his words. With every step, Lee Jong-jae demonstrated that he was ready to take complete control of the situation. This composure brought the others into indescribable delight, kindling in them a thirst for the coming battles. The tension gave way to friendly laughter as the barrier of mistrust between them finally collapsed. But the memory of the forces they would have to face quickly brought everyone back to the harsh reality. The enemies lurking in the darkness possessed nightmarish power and led legions of damned souls. Ancient entities like IGMUN have frozen in anticipation of the inevitable clash of the titans. And even the most valiant knights, clad in shining armor, were prepared to give their lives in this war. Every battle in these cursed lands threatened to turn to a crushing explosion of primordial magic. The strength Cody Wood displayed continued to amaze the imagination with its wild, primal power. Ordinary people could only use all available weapons to hold back the onslaught of monsters. But a united S-rank team was able to clear this deadly dungeon in just one day. And when the echo of this confidence swept through the ranks of the allies, they could only hold their breath in anticipation of triumph. However, behind the scenes of this triumphal march, doubts were already brewing among those who were accustomed to looking down on the world. Mocking the ambitions of the people, the arrogant observers did not believe that such insignificant forces could survive in the abyss. But Go Taewook remained unshaken, knowing full well the real value of every second in this damned place. Suddenly, poisonous creatures poured out of the darkness, ready to tear the intruders to pieces. Cody Wood reacted instantly, meeting his enemy with a crushing and precise blow. The onslaught of the monsters was swift, but the well-coordinated work of the group left the monsters no chance. Each warrior moved at the limit of his abilities, dodging deadly fangs and poison. At the front, Lim Aeon, with her usual mad passion, urged her allies on, demanding even greater speed from them. A real massacre whirled in a mad dance, where the slightest mistake would cost lives. Yoshikawa Sarara, gathering all her will, struck down enemies one after another, not allowing fear to take over. Watching this furious battle, Lee Jong-jae noted with quiet satisfaction how much his comrades had grown. But suddenly this madness was interrupted, forcing the team to freeze in place. In the middle of the destroyed hall, something extremely strange and ominous appeared before their eyes. Wariness gave way to a chilling realization as they drew closer. Before them stood the eerie statues, former adventurers forever turned into cold stone. At that very moment, the air around trembled with colossal, overwhelming magic. An arrogant whisper reached them, making their blood run cold. From the depths of the dungeon emerged the true mistress of these ruins, the great mistress of snakes, bringing primordial horror. Her blazing gaze promised eternal death to anyone who dared to disturb the peace of the sanctuary. And at this critical moment, everything depended on whether they could resist the force that could turn their very hope to stone. Lee Jong-jae, despite the mortal danger, only grinned cheekily, as if this whole situation was just a funny game to him. However, Yoshikawa Sarara did not share his carelessness, feeling how a chilling horror slowly paralyzed her movements. The ancient monster, bearing its serpentine tongue, reveled in the fear of the uninvited guests, anticipating a quick and merciless reprisal. The hunters understood perfectly well that one wrong move would cost them their lives, and each of them internally prepared themselves for the worst. Unwilling to retreat even a single step further, Lee Jong-jae screamed furiously, trying to shake off the shackles of paralyzing fear. Go Taewook, maintaining an icy composure, gestured to his allies to hold their formation and not to panic. His sharp gaze behind the dark lenses of his glasses calculated the trajectory of the blow, looking for the slightest vulnerability in the monster's defense. Understanding the leader's silent command, Sarara gripped her weapon resolutely, ready to rush into the thick of the battle. And in an instant, the entire group took off, attacking the formidable enemy in a coordinated manner from all sides. A furious avalanche of blows fell upon the giant body of the Snake Queen, shaking the ancient vaults of the dungeon. But the Gorgon only looked at them with disdain, as if all their titanic efforts were just child's play for her. Responding to the attack with a devastating swing of her tail, she easily scattered the attackers, forcing them to retreat. Wounded but still full of rage, the snake on her head hissed, demanding the blood of those who dared to challenge them. But before the monster could regroup, new forces rushed into battle, not giving the enemy a second's respite. The enraged queen waved her hands, calling upon a colossal magical force capable of crushing anyone in its path. In her hands, a gigantic ice spear was woven, radiating the deadly cold of ancient glaciers. Pushing the limits of human ability, Go Taewook and Surata simultaneously launched into the air for a decisive joint move. Their concentrated ice magic and pure will merged into one crushing stream, aimed straight at the heart of the monster. A powerful explosion of elemental energy pierced the impenetrable scales, causing the formidable ruler to shudder in unbearable pain. And that deafening cry, full of rage and impotent anger, echoed through the halls, marking the turning point in this mortal battle. The hunters rushed into a joint attack, trying to build on their success and prevent the monster from recovering. Yoshikawa Sarara glided swiftly across the battlefield, feeling the invisible support of her comrades behind her. Her allies acted as a single, well-honed mechanism, coordinating every move and shielding each other from enemy attacks. The tension grew with each passing second, and even Cody Wood, watching the battle from above, could not hide his excitement before the decisive blow. A powerful blow from Sarara's ice spear fell straight on the Snake Queen's head, breaking through her mental defense. Lee Jongjae held his breath, staring intently into the epicenter of the battle, waiting for the perfect moment to intervene. The defeated ruler clenched her teeth in anger, refusing to accept the superiority of the insolent aliens. Her face twisted into a mad grimace. She screamed again, releasing the last crumbs of her colossal magic. A devastating shockwave swept through the hall, forcing the heroes to retreat under the onslaught of primordial chaos. Surrounded by an ominous glow, the queen swung her fearsome trident, ready to destroy anyone who dared to come close. However, her opponents had already regrouped and were looking for a gap in her defense to deliver a crushing blow. The raging storm of the elements swirled around the monster again, depriving it of the ability to defend itself. The combined will of the heroes was embodied in 4 devastating techniques, merging into a single deadly stream. This incredible synergy of magic and pure power pierced the cocoon of the mistress's rage, depriving her of her last strength. The gigantic body of the ancient monster fell shudderingly onto the cold stone floor of the arena. A ringing silence reigned, broken only by the heavy breathing of tired but triumphant warriors. Unable to believe their own eyes, the hunters began to realize that this seemingly impossible triumph was finally theirs. At that moment, Sarara felt a warm touch on her shoulder, causing her to flinch in surprise. Turning around, she met the encouraging gaze of Lee Jongjae, whose calm appearance finally dispelled the remnants of the battle trance. The danger had passed, and now, looking at each other, they realized that they had gone through this test together, becoming even stronger. Lee Jongjae only smiled condescendingly, showing that the situation was completely under his control. However, his companions froze in confusion, sensing a sudden change in the air. The space above them ripped open with a roar, releasing clouds of ominous dark energy. The entire team looked up in horror, realizing that the true nightmare was just beginning. A giant fanged mouth emerged from the rift, ready to devour all living things in its path. A colossal dark dragon, shrouded in poisonous crimson flame, appeared before the hunters. His multicolored eyes glowed with a primal fury, boding no good for the uninvited guests. But instead of running, Lee Jongjae confidently stepped forward, ignoring the warnings of his comrades. Everyone held their breath as they watched the mad loner challenge the ancient overlord. In a calm voice, the young man stated that his friends would not be harmed anymore, and he took full responsibility. There was no fear in his posture, only a cold determination to meet the enemy face to face. With a mocking grin, he called for the monster to be silent, making it clear who the real predator was here. Enraged by such insolence, the dragon roared, shaking the vaults of the cave with his mighty roar. For a moment, his icy gaze focused on the bug that dared to challenge him. The next second, a furious crimson discharge rushed straight at the target, leaving no chance of survival. But the deadly blow only sent a cloud of dark feathers into the air, heralding the awakening of true power. Lee Jongjae rose through the smoke and flames, majestic blood-red wings spreading behind him. Gripping the hilts of his trusty blades, he prepared to end the life of this monster once and for all. In the blink of an eye, the young man soared into the air, delivering a crushing blow and causing the dragon to howl in pain. He whirled around the stunned beast in a swift whirlwind, turning the battle into a flawless dance of death. A huge shadow loomed over the battlefield, but the young man only tightened his grip on the hilt of his weapon, preparing for the decisive attack. His gaze flared with a crimson flame, revealing the primordial rage and thirst for victory that had awakened within him. Cutting through the air with a bloody streak, he rushed downwards, leaving the monster no chance to dodge. The wounded beast's deafening roar shook the ancient vaults as the blade sank deep into its flesh. The summoned familiar appeared in all its formidable majesty, ready to carry out any command of its master. The huge serpent roared in rage, trying to free itself from the raging water captivity that had restricted its movements. The enemy could not believe their eyes, realizing that they were facing a force far more powerful than they could have imagined. Soaring above the seething waves, the winged warrior continued his merciless onslaught. The full power of the enchanted sea, under the control of the Grand Duke Jormungandr, descended upon the battlefield in a giant whirlpool. Merciless streams of water soared to the skies, sweeping away and suppressing everything that tried to resist this element. The monster's gaping mouth seemed like an abyss, ready to swallow the daring daredevil whole. But there was not a shadow of fear on the young man's face, only cold calculation and absolute confidence in his own superiority. In the next moment, a crimson giant rose from the abyss, causing the earth itself to tremble with horror. Cody Wood jumped to his feet, breathing heavily and unable to hide the shock that washed over him at what he saw. The surrounding people froze in stupor, frantically trying to comprehend the scale of the collision that had occurred. Cody Wood looked back at Yoshikawa Surara in panic, as if hoping to find some logical explanation for this unimaginable power in her eyes. and our hero just calmly approached them, putting away his weapon with the air of if everything was going strictly according to his plan. A slight, barely noticeable smile of a winner who knows his own worth lit up his face. Yoshikawa Surara watched him go, stunned by how easily he had dealt with his deadly threat. Unable to bear the tension, Cody Wood rushed towards the young man in a rage, demanding an answer as to why he had hidden the true nature of this cursed dungeon from them. The young man merely shrugged his shoulders, assuring his angry allies that he himself knew nothing about this hidden threat. With a slight smirk on his face, he called for an end to the pointless argument, because the most important thing was that their common goal had been achieved. Cody Wood and Yoshikawa Surara could only swallow the insult in silence, acknowledging that his strength had surpassed all expectations. Cody's heavy gaze bored into the young man, trying to unravel what other secrets this mysterious ally was hiding. But he, without deigning to give them any unnecessary explanations, confidently walked away, leaving behind a trail of omissions. Right before them, the shining gates of the Azure portal burst open with a roar, marking the completion of this deadly mission. The group stepped into the blinding light, unaware of the dramatic changes that had already been set in motion in the human world. At the same moment, on the other side of the world, the halls of a huge press conference were bursting with continuous camera flashes. Reporters from all corners of the planet were eager to get the scoop, interrupting each other with loud shouts. One of the speakers confidently answered questions about future plans, trying to maintain control over the raging crowd. But a sudden, insistent beep from a mobile phone made one of those present freeze for a moment in surprise. Within seconds, the courtroom descended into complete chaos as people began to realize the magnitude of the breaking news coming out of South Korea. Rumors of the unprecedented incident immediately reached those accustomed to monitoring the world order from the shadows. Influential curators hastily verified the incoming data, refusing to believe in the reality of the unfolding nightmare. The glowing screens reflected the harsh truth that threatened to destroy the fragile balance of power between the guilds forever. The display showed in real time the face of the very same troublemaker who had challenged the system. One of the leaders could not contain his emotions, screaming in rage, powerless before the insolence of the unknown upstart. His assistant only smiled condescendingly, realizing that this unexpected piece on the board could become an excellent tool in their game. Go Talwook listened silently to the argument, and his golden eyes lit up with the dangerous excitement of a predator who has sensed worthy prey. Meanwhile, clouds of a coming storm were gathering over the city, plunged into the darkness of night, ready to wipe the old rules into dust. Lee Jong-jae, his face frozen on the communications screen, warned his allies of impending disaster. His interlocutor listened attentively to the report, realizing that the situation had completely gotten out of control. Time was inexorably slipping through their fingers, forcing them to resort to the most desperate measures for salvation. Meanwhile, around the world, vanguards of hunters have already begun storming hostile dungeons, seeking to outpace fate. Fierce battles broke out one after another, drawing more and more warriors into their whirlpool. Go Taewook and Lee Jung-jae were well aware that they were entering a ruthless game where any mistake would lead to instant death. And in the silence of the night city, an inconspicuous building towered, hiding the epicenter of the coming nightmare. Elite mercenaries guarding the peace of the secret complex suddenly sensed the approach of a monstrous threat. The barriers shattered into pieces under the onslaught of incredible power, leaving the defenders no chance of escape. The guards fell limply to the ground, overcome by the irresistible force of the uninvited guest. Cody Wood burst into the lab, shrouded in an ominous aura of superiority and unbridled anger. Cold-bloodedly stepping over the fallen enemies, he confidently led his squad deeper into the corridors. His every gesture and look betrayed deep contempt for those who tried to stand in his way. And finally, a secret area with life support capsules appeared before his eyes. What he saw made his blood boil with rage, wiping away the last drops of self-control. His thunderous voice echoed through the walls of the complex, demanding immediate answers. As he peered into the eerie silhouettes behind the glass of the tanks, he felt pure hatred flaring up inside him. Cody Wood's energy was bursting out, threatening to destroy all the fruits of these forbidden experiments. However, at that very moment, something ominous and alive began to rise from a viscous black puddle on the floor behind him. Feeling the sudden change in space, Cody Wood turned around sharply, frozen in deep amazement. From the darkness behind him, a mysterious masked opponent silently materialized, emitting an overwhelming aura. At the same moment, black cords bound the guards throughout the hall, depriving them of any opportunity to protect their leader. Cody Wood swallowed hard, realizing he was trapped in the face of overwhelming odds. However, the uninvited guest was in no hurry to attack. His cold gaze from under his mask demanded complete submission. Instead of striking, he slowly extended his black-gloved hand, offering something unexpected. It was a temptation that could turn the entire course of their confrontation. In the stranger's fingers, a mysterious ampoule filled with incredible power gleamed dimly. The momentary confusion in Cody's eyes quickly gave way to the usual cold calculation. The dangerous tension in the air gradually dissipated, giving way to a business-like agreement. A triumphant and sinister grin played across Cody Wood's face. The terms of the deal completely satisfied him. Meanwhile, on the other side of the world, the skies turned crimson as giant gates swung open right in the middle of the desert. From the raging whirlwind of azure energy, one after another, those whose names had long since become legends began to emerge. The first to step onto the scorched earth was the unperturbed Park Sung-jin, one of the strongest hunters at the national level. Following him, grinning predatorily, walked Kwon Kang-hyuk, anticipating new great battles. The serious Kwak Shi-yan only sighed with displeasure, reproaching her comrades for their frivolous attitude towards the matter. Even the secretive Seo Han-gil succumbed to the general mood, hiding a slight grin behind his mask. And the restless Lim Ayeon was already rushing the group with all her might, burning with impatience before the new sortie. Leaving the defeated dungeon behind, this invincible team confidently moved towards the sunset. Looking at their rapid progress, it was clear that it was only a matter of time before these monsters reached SS rank. And even Lee Jong-jae, looking at his palms, clearly understood that the hour of his own triumph had finally arrived. Meanwhile, at the very top of one of the city's greatest skyscrapers, a meeting was brewing that could radically change the balance of power. The famous explorer could not hide his excitement when the long-awaited guest appeared on his doorstep. Greeting the visitor warmly, he shook his hand firmly, recognizing in him the incredible figure of Kim Tae-hyung. Having settled into a spacious office, they began a conversation in which polite smiles concealed a mutual pragmatic interest. Over a cup of tea, the owner of the office indulged in memories, sincerely rejoicing at the success of his young protege. Kim Tae-hyung himself only smiled slightly, knowing that all his past achievements were only the first steps towards his true goal. Pan Chae-soo, a renowned master and unrivaled expert in skill fusion, understood the true value of this power very well. After all, from the very moment of their first meeting, he saw in this young man something frightening and at the same time enticing. By conducting complex experiments and manipulating energy, the scientist repeatedly became convinced of Tae-hyung's unique compatibility with forbidden magic. Even other influential figures praised the potential of this union, seeing it as the key to creating the perfect weapon. But interrupting the train of memories, the master asked with curiosity what brought the strongest player to him today. Tae-hyung didn't waste time on empty chatter and immediately got to the main point of his visit. For a moment, a tense silence hung in the air, and the scientist braced himself for another ambitious request. Interlocking his fingers and fixing his icy, piercing gaze on his interlocutor, the guy voiced his insane desire. Upon hearing this, the old master's face was distorted by a grimace of deep anxiety, and cold sweat appeared on his forehead. Pan Chae-soo's eyes widened in shock as he fully realized the scale and danger of what he had planned. Leaping from his seat, he began to furiously argue that such a sharp surge in power would inevitably lead to a deadly backflow of mana. However, Kim Tae-hyung didn't even flinch, and his eyes flashed an ominous scarlet light, demonstrating absolute confidence in his body. Faced with this unbreakable will, the old man froze, realizing that before him stood a monster that no laws of nature could stop. All he could do was clutch his head in despair, realizing that he was powerless to resist this brilliant madness. But it was too late to retreat. Lee Jong-jae made his choice and prepared for the first test of his life. He looked forward with a firm resolve, ready to accept any consequences of this crazy experiment. With trembling hands, the old scientist activated the installation, starting a process that could no longer be reversed. At that very moment, an ancient, unknown force flowed through the young man's body, causing him to shudder from the sudden flash. A blinding column of pure energy filled the entire laboratory, erasing the boundaries of reality and tearing a cry of pain from the observer's chest. Within this radiance, the boy's consciousness began to dissolve, carrying him away from the material world. And there, on the very border of existence, he was met by the mysterious Igmon, the embodiment of pure divine power. The ancient spirit extended its shining hand and gently touched his forehead, blessing him on a new, dangerous path. At that moment, something deep within Lee Jong-jae's soul that had been dormant for centuries awakened. His eye flew open, lit by a scarlet flame of incredible, primordial power. Unable to withstand the colossal pressure, the protective dome shattered into thousands of pieces, shaking the entire building. The young man slowly lowered his hands, looking in surprise at the force raging inside him, which had changed his very essence. The realization of the scale of his newfound power left him frozen in deep shock. The security guards, caught off guard by the massive destruction, rushed into the hall at the sound of the explosion. They rushed to the aid of the injured researcher, frantically trying to assess the situation. But as soon as they raised their eyes, fear of the unknown gripped their hearts with a death grip. Amidst the chaos and rubble, Lee Jong-jae stood motionless, shrouded in an aura of serene yet terrifying grandeur. Soon, news of what had happened reached headquarters, causing the entire top brass of the organization to tremble. Behind closed doors, influential leaders tried to understand exactly what kind of monster they would now have to deal with. Lee Jong-jae himself, exhausted by the rebirth, understood perfectly well that his past, calm life was lost forever. Association officials strongly recommended that Kim Tae-hyung handle state property more carefully. However, given his past achievements, the leadership was prepared to turn a blind eye to any accompanying destruction. They were much more concerned about another question, whether Kim Tae-hyung himself felt the colossal changes that had taken place in his body. The mentor's heavy, searching gaze demanded an extremely honest and direct answer. The branch manager sank into deep thought, trying to comprehend the true extent of the power that had awakened within the boy. But before they could continue this difficult conversation, the silence of the office was broken by alarming news. It turned out that rumors of the incredible rebirth had already spread far beyond the association. Elite hunters began to gather at the main training center, drawn by the incredible surge of energy. Kim Tae-hyung headed towards the testing hall without any hesitation, ready to face those who doubted his superiority. A barely noticeable smile played on his lips. He understood perfectly well what kind of spectacle awaited the gathered crowd. The tension among the new arrivals grew with each passing second, causing even experienced fighters to exchange nervous glances. The hunters parted before him, instinctively sensing the mortal danger emanating from the young man. The association's president himself rushed to personally greet Kim Tae-hyung, showering him with compliments. Behind this mask of politeness and false cordiality hid the cold calculation of an influential manipulator. There was too much at stake, as the world's strongest players had arrived for this test. Among them, Go Tae-wook stood out. His predatory, assessing gaze did not bode well for the newcomer. The huge hall turned into an arena where the fate of the new hierarchy of forces would soon be decided. The organizers offered Kim Tae-hyung the opportunity to choose the most comfortable format for completing the assessment. Go! Tae-wook froze in anticipation of an answer, hoping to see at least a shadow of fear on the face of his potential opponent. But instead of a long explanation, Kim Tae-hyung simply released his overwhelming scarlet aura, instantly plunging the entire hall into indescribable shock. A powerful wave of monstrous energy gripped the hearts of those present, causing even experienced observers to clench their fists in frustration. Tae-ying himself only grinned slightly, openly enjoying the effect produced. The association's officials panicked, realizing that what was happening was getting out of control. A sharp gust of scarlet power swept through the entire hall, causing the air to vibrate and those present to barely stay on their feet. Even the impenetrable Go Tae-wook felt a tremor when confronted with the true extent of his opponent's strength. Organizers scrambled to figure out how to save the planned exam from complete collapse. And among the ordinary candidates, a quiet panic began to set in. None of them were ready for a test of this level. Nevertheless, having tried to restore at least a semblance of order, the association's representative called for moving on to the next step. The examiners were instructed to divide the participants into groups in order to finally begin the selection process. The management tried its best to smooth things over and channel the simmering tension into a manageable channel. However, the proud young fighters categorically refused to accept the fact that they had been overshadowed. Whispers about rank and past achievements immediately began to spread through the crowd, fueling the candidates' fading egos. Some looked anxiously at the silhouette of the man who had rewritten the rules of the day. Others were seething with anger, refusing to acknowledge the superiority of others. All their gazes turned with hatred to Tae-hyung's back, in whom they saw only an arrogant upstart. Soon the candidates were led into the testing area, where their greatest nightmare awaited them. Stepping forward with absolute nonchalance, Tae-hyung officially declared himself their personal examiner. With feigned politeness, he voiced a ridiculously simple, but therefore even more terrifying, condition for passing. The candidates were stunned, instantly realizing how slim their chances were of breaking through this wall. And Tae-hyung just froze in anticipation, ready to teach these self-confident, proud men a harsh lesson. With a slight, barely noticeable grin, he makes the first move, inviting his opponents to show everything they are capable of. But instead of a furious response, the crowd only freezes in indecision, frozen by a primal fear of his power. However, pride does not allow them to simply retreat, and one of the fighters, Jeffrey, gives free rein to the anger that consumes him. Rushing forward despite his partner's warnings, he coats his fists in destructive purple energy. Tae-hyung doesn't even try to dodge, allowing his enraged opponent to get within striking distance. Triumphant and believing in his easy victory, the madman unleashes all his accumulated power into this single attack. But the next moment, the space shakes from a crushing, invisible-to-the-eye counterattack. A deafening roar breaks the silence of the arena, raising thick clouds of dust and stone chips into the air. When the fog clears, a shocked audience is left to see a defeated Jeffrey, bleeding on the cold floor, and Tae-hyung just calmly shakes off the dust, releasing his true, scorching red aura, which smells of inevitable death. An oppressive silence hangs over the room as the frightened candidates look at their fallen comrade. The blonde girl's gaze fills with rage and despair because she understands that there is no way back. In a desperate attempt to save the situation, she calls on everyone to calm down and work together. Succumbing to panic and a thirst for survival, the remaining candidates attack their tormentor as a united front. Tae-hyung accepts the challenge with frightening calm, beginning his deadly dance amidst the chaos of magical attacks. Even treacherous attacks from behind cannot catch him off guard. He controls every move of his opponents. With one precise movement, he crushes another attacker, depriving him of any hope of success. But the pressure from the opponents only increases, and they try to squeeze Taehyung in a vice, attacking from all possible sides at once. Easily dodging their combined attack, he soars high into the air, completely taking over the initiative. He ends the fight with a lightning-fast roundhouse kick, clearly proving that the difference between them is an unbridgeable chasm. One after another, his opponents suffer crushing defeat, unable to withstand the onslaught of this incredible force. He literally smashes another fighter into the ground, turning the solid floor into a pile of debris. With a lightning strike, he sends the next attacker flying, completely depriving them of strength. The surviving allies watch this display of absolute superiority with growing horror. Looking with disappointment at his defeated enemies, he declares that they have completely failed to live up to his expectations. Lazily stretching his neck, he asks with obvious boredom if they are really going to stand aside like that. His arrogant provocation leaves the survivors shaking with rage and impotence. But among them there is one who is ready to go to the end, despite the obvious mortal danger. Yoshikawa Surara takes a determined step forward, ready to take on this unequal fight. He just watches her go silently and with cold indifference. Mystical energy begins to swirl around the girl's body, taking the form of glowing vines. Focusing all his will, Surara releases hidden potential, causing the air to vibrate with tension. Watching this spectacle, he only smirks condescendingly, inviting her to make the first move. With a battle cry, she rushes forward, putting the rest of her life into this throw. The clash of their forces creates a colossal explosion that literally splits the space around them. Much to her opponent's surprise, this fragile girl actually manages to stop his direct blow. With difficulty holding back the gushing blood, Surara grabs his wrist with a death grip and gives the order to attack. Seizing the moment, the rest of the squad instantly rise into the air for a joint-crushing blow. He instantly realizes that Surara deliberately sacrificed herself to completely restrict his movements. However, instead of fear, a sinister and frighteningly confident smile appears on his face, and at that moment, a dark abyss of energy engulfs everything around, while Surara takes his decisive step. Those around them try to comprehend what is happening in horror, feeling how an unknown force is binding their bodies. Lee Jong-jae is in agony, suffocating under the terrifying pressure of someone else's magic. His consciousness is literally torn apart, locked in the grip of crimson chains. A piercing cry of despair is drowned out by the roar of the raging storm, depriving him of his last strength to fight. Kim Tae-young watches this hopeless, yet incredibly stubborn attempt to stand firm with slight surprise. Enshrouded in crimson shackles, the wounded Surara mentally returns to her mentor's words about not giving up. Only now does Tae-young realize that the girl is absorbing external mana, turning someone else's power against him. A powerful resonance of energies provokes a bright flash, ready to tear apart the very fabric of space. With her last strength, she throws herself forward, putting the rest of her life into this one blow. The shackles that held her opponent in place shatter into a myriad of pieces. The clenched fist freezes in the air, marking the end of this desperate duel. Resigned to her fate, Surara just smiles quietly, letting go of all her worries. Her weakening fingers barely touch his chest, leaving only a trace of fading warmth. Kim Tae-hyung follows her with a cold, piercing gaze, in which there is no longer any room for the previous rage. When the dust finally settles, only the lifeless bodies of the participants remain in the ruined arena. The girl, deprived of strength, plunges into deep oblivion, devoting herself entirely to this battle. But even in her sleep, her pure, unbending will continues to soar invisibly over the battlefield. Walking slowly away, Tae-young leaves behind his defeated opponents and past feuds. A barely noticeable smirk plays on his lips. After all, she passed this harsh test successfully. At the same time, Go Tae-wook stood frozen in the training hall, his presence literally radiating overwhelming power. In the main control center, monitor screens flickered with a cold neon light as they processed the final reports. The staff stood frozen in shock as the results of the completed test exceeded all conceivable expectations. The head of the association could not believe his eyes, frantically trying to comprehend the scale of what was happening. A cold sweat broke out on his face at the thought of the consequences this could lead to. But before he could recover from the shock, the operators began to excitedly shout about a new anomaly on the screens. The tension in the room reached its peak, causing the president to hold his breath in confusion. And in the arena, flooded with ghostly light, two legendary figures stood opposite each other. Tae-young slowly closed the distance, confident in every step and decision he made. Go Tae-wook calmly acknowledged the undeniable success of his student, who had gone through the crucible of a very difficult selection process. However, Tae-young understood perfectly well that this conversation was only a formal prelude to something much more dangerous. By uttering his opponent's name, Tae-wook seemed to throw down an invisible challenge that hung in the frosty air. Their gazes met, and at that moment, time in the vast arena seemed to slow down. Tae-wook's eyes flashed gold with predatory intensity, and his body was enveloped in a powerful, pulsating wave of pure energy. Instead of fear, A barely noticeable anticipatory grin appeared on Taehyun's face. His fist clenched until it cracked, responding to the unstoppable call of the coming battle that could not be stopped. The thirst to fight the strongest opponent in this world flared up in his soul like a bright crimson flame. Through the panoramic glass, observers gazed in awe at this great and frightening confrontation. They frantically thought about what to do, since it was beyond their power to control a collision of such a scale. After all, now in this arena, those who rightfully occupied the top of the world rankings of the strongest were supposed to meet. The association representatives stood frozen in stupor, unable to believe their own eyes and realizing that the situation had completely gotten out of control. However, there was no turning back, and the management made the only possible decision at that moment. Taking full responsibility for the consequences, they opened the arena and allowed the battle to begin. The announcement that everything that happened in the hall would be recorded sounded like an official death sentence for one of them. Lee Jong-jae just chuckled coldly, realizing that the association's rules no longer had any meaning to them. There was not a drop of fear on his face, only anticipation of a fight that was supposed to decide absolutely everything. Go Taewook remained unperturbed, reminding his opponent that this was his best chance to prove his superiority and take the throne. But Lee Jong-jae's brazen response made it clear he's not here for the rankings, but to crush the strongest. Go Taewook's predatory golden eyes narrowed as he took in the challenge, and the air around him instantly became electric. The red light on the security camera flashed, beginning a live broadcast of the historic clash. And at that very second, the arena was shaken by a deafening explosion from the first, incredibly powerful collision of the two titans. Lee Jong-jae rushed to attack first, putting all his accumulated rage and crimson energy into the blow. But Go Taewook easily read his every move, his gaze remaining crystal clear and frighteningly calm. Lunge after lunge, Lee Jong-jae struck at the limits of human ability. However, Go Taewook moved like a ghost, instantly dodging and entering from his opponent's blind spot. The high-speed exchange of blows turned the arena into a raging hurricane of pure force, where the slightest mistake cost lives. At some point, Lee Jong-jae realized that his opponent's power exceeded even his darkest expectations. Another crushing blow sent tons of dust and stone chips into the air, causing the walls to shake. Trying to close the distance, Lee Jong-jae blocked the deadly flow of energy, realizing that he was losing the initiative. But Go Taewook was already flying towards him, ready to put an end to this confrontation with one final blow. Gathering his remaining strength, Lee Jong-jae delivers a crushing counterblow, forcing his opponent to retreat. Once on the ground, he instantly groups himself, realizing that this is an opportunity he cannot miss. A crimson fire of true determination flashes in his eyes, ready to crush any obstacles in his path. Throwing his arm forward, he releases chains shrouded in darkness to completely deprive the enemy of freedom of maneuver. Go Taewook finds himself bound by glowing shackles of dark energy, holding back his furious onslaught. But the piercing gaze of his golden eyes proves that his will is not so easily broken. A dangerous grin appears on Lee Jong-jae's face, confident that he has his opponent trapped in a deadly trap. In response, Go Taewook merely concentrates colossal power in his palm, causing the air around him to vibrate with tension. With a mighty jerk, he breaks the shackles, releasing a shining blade that dispels the impending darkness. The warrior's face is hidden by a ghostly visor, signifying the awakening of his true, crushing essence. Clad in armor of light, he launches a mad frontal attack, leaving his enemy no time to think. Lee Jong-jae takes on this challenge with frightening composure, ready to face the coming storm head-on. A hidden dagger instantly materializes in his hand, capable of piercing the slightest gap in his opponent's defense. With a deafening ringing, steel collides with steel, striking out sheaves of blinding sparks. The colossal force of their collision literally shatters the solid arena beneath their feet. The enemies converge in a furious, mad dance of death, exchanging lightning-fast blows at the limits of human possibility. The speed of their movements goes beyond the perception of an ordinary person, turning the duel into a continuous whirlwind of whistling blades. But at that moment, Lee Jong-jae realizes that he has never encountered such overwhelming and pure power before. Overcoming fierce resistance, Go Taewook continues to press with all his determination, relentlessly marching towards his victory. And in this endless series of attacks, each of them is ready to put their own lives on the line for one decisive attack. Meanwhile, in the control center, the situation quickly spirals out of control as one monitor screen after another is covered in a veil of interference. Left without visual contact, management panics and tries to figure out why all the surveillance cameras have gone dark. Not wanting to remain in the dark, one of the bosses decisively leaves his post and heads straight to the scene. The tension in the headquarters is growing to the limit, because no one suspects what terrifying power is awakening in the arena right now. And in the eye of the storm, a wounded Kim Tae-hyum, breathing heavily, desperately tries to hide his precarious position behind a cheeky grin. His formidable opponent, Cody Wood, calls on him to stop this pointless cat-and-mouse game and finally finish the drawn-out fight. Tae-hyung tries to convince his opponent that his slowness was just part of the plan, but this lie sounds completely unconvincing. But Cody sees right through his opponent, and the very space around them instantly contracts with the surge of pressure. The enemy's words about Taehyung still hiding his duke's power make the young man literally freeze in shock. He can't believe that his biggest secret, which he kept so carefully, was revealed so easily. However, the answer turns out to be even more stunning. Cody Wood himself has signed a contract with one of the great demons. Pointing the blade at the confused boy, he demands to confess who exactly endowed Taehyung with this destructive power. Realizing that there is no turning back, Taehyung only grins nervously, accepting the deadly challenge thrown at him. He slowly raises his hand, about to tear off the last shackles from his true, forbidden source. And at the same moment, the arena is torn apart by a colossal burst of crimson energy, signifying the summoning of an otherworldly entity. Two implacable enemies clash in silent confrontation, realizing that their battle has now reached a completely new level. Cody's armor begins to resonate, emitting a blinding golden glow in response to the enemy's awakening. Darkness and flame merge as his sword fills with a destructive purple aura of the abyss. Shrouded in dark wings, the warrior appears in all his sinister glory, ready to crush anyone in his path. Their eyes meet. They are ready to take the final, decisive step and put an end to this deadly duel forever. A swift dash towards each other marks the beginning of a crushing clash between two inflexible forces. A powerful explosion of released energy shakes the arena itself, blinding everyone present with a furious flash of light. As the dust begins to settle, shocked witnesses of the battle try in vain to discern the outcome of the duel through the thick curtain of smoke. They were overcome with fear and excitement because the lives of the strongest fighters were at stake and their confrontation had reached a completely different level. In the clouds of smoke, the majestic silhouette of the Dark Knight appears again, ready to deliver the final blow with his colossal blade. However, even under the pressure of the deadly aura, Kim Tae-young maintains absolute composure, ready to accept this challenge. Their blades cross in the air, but instead of continuing the carnage, an unexpected offer is made to part peacefully this time. Go Tae-wook makes this decision, keeping a promise that their next meeting in the dark depths of the abyss will be their last. A dangerous spark of crimson flame goes out on Kim Tae-young's hand, leaving behind only an oppressive feeling of incompleteness. He turns around silently and leaves, leaving the astonished spectators frozen in place by the sudden end of the duel. In the end, he casts only a fleeting, barely perceptible glance, in which one can read absolute confidence in his own abilities. Seeing him off with frightened cries, people understand that now all responsibility for the consequences falls on their shoulders. Ignoring the hustle and bustle behind him, the warrior takes a step forward towards his new, even more ambitious goals. Meanwhile, far beyond this battlefield, amidst the storm clouds, rises an ominous floating castle of demons. A sudden and crushing blow falls upon its centuries-old walls, instantly turning the stonework into dust. The beautiful and dangerous Rosaria only sighs wearily, dissatisfied that someone dared to disturb her peace in such a rude manner. Seated on her throne, she restrains her anger, knowing full well whose foul character is behind this brazen invasion. The ruined walls reveal her loyal servants, ready to tear apart any trespasser at the first command. But the guest who appeared, blazing with crimson power, demands that the one who entered into a sacred contract with her be immediately summoned. Rosaria only looks at him questioningly, trying to figure out what hidden motives this uninvited visitor has. Kim Tae-hyung doesn't hide his anger, saying that all excuses are just empty words. He accuses the demoness of the fact that her ward dared to appropriate and use someone else's powers without permission. However, Rosaria only smiles condescendingly, not at all frightened by his menacing tone. She remarks with a smile that these powers suit her pet much better than their previous owner. Her gaze becomes predatory and intriguing, revealing her readiness for a cruel game. An ominous pink aura begins to boil around the throne, signaling the imminent start of the confrontation. But Kim Tae-young has no intention of backing down and unleashes a wave of destructive crimson energy, making it clear that he is not going to ask twice. Realizing the inevitability of battle, Rosaria rises from her seat, spreading her menacing demonic wings. Behind her, deadly dark tentacles rise into the air, ready to tear apart any troublemaker. With an icy smirk on her lips, she makes the first move, instantly sending her weapons into attack. The air hisses as the two powerful forces collide in fury, but Kim Tae-young easily withstands this onslaught, fixing his unyielding gaze on his rival. With one movement of his hand, he materializes dozens of sharp crimson blades in the air, aimed directly at the target, and the next moment this deadly rain rushes down, trying to pierce the daring demoness. But Rosaria defends herself masterfully, easily crushing and reflecting enemy projectiles with her powerful appendages. Then Kim Tae-young decides to unleash a colossal crimson spear on her, capable of raising all living things to dust. However, at this critical moment, a treacherous tentacle wraps around his ankle, catching the experienced fighter off guard. With a sharp and merciless movement, the demoness knocks him down, seizing the initiative in this fight. Triumphant, Rosaria soars upward, completely dominating the space of the throne room. and a crushing column of pure energy falls upon the arena, finally destroying any hope of a peaceful outcome. Surrounding herself with gigantic wings, the demoness rushes towards the enemy, ready to deliver the decisive blow. She unleashes the full force of her primordial darkness, seeking to completely engulf the enemy. However, the next second, Triumph turns to shock as her body is pierced by sharp black spikes. The blood boils in the wounds, and severe pain constrains her every movement. Igman emerges from the shadows with a triumphant grin, reveling in his sudden and crushing victory. He mercilessly directs his bloody spear straight at his defeated opponent, but Rosaria, despite her wounds, only casts an icy, contemptuous glance at him. With one powerful swing, Igman causes the space around them to shatter into thousands of pieces. However, the illusory world of the throne room begins to rapidly fade, returning everything to its place. And now Rosaria sits once again on her majestic throne, enveloped in an unrivaled aura of superiority. Igman realizes that all this time he was being brazenly led by the nose, forced to fight only an illusory shadow. The demoness mockingly reminds him that within this dimension her power is limitless, and even an attempt to appear here in person will not bring her enemy the desired victory. With a sly smile, she decides to reveal to him the secret that has tormented him for so long, the secret of how her humble contractor managed to control such colossal power. Igman listens carefully to her words, trying to grasp the full scale of the impending threat. Rosaria just smiles mysteriously, because the real game is just beginning. Meanwhile, in the real world, Li Zhongjae faces unexpected changes. As soon as he entered, those present froze in sacred awe, addressing him by a false name. Bowing deeply, they greet with hope the one they have been waiting for so faithfully. Ricky Harleys arrives at the meeting prepared for the toughest negotiations. Without further ado, he demands to get straight to the point. However, in front of him sit people whose faces do not promise anything good, but only confirm his worst fears. The news they brought made him freeze for a moment in surprise. Every word the interlocutor says sounds like a sentence depriving one of one's last hope. The messenger nervously adjusted his glasses, trying to hide the tremor in his voice in the face of the unfolding disaster. He reports that the elite squad of 4 of the strongest SS-ranked players was completely wiped out. The realization of the scale of the tragedy falls heavily on the young man's shoulders. Even Cody Wood's authority couldn't prevent this nightmare, leaving the organization defenseless in the face of threat. Now, on the brink of collapse, they are forced to beg for salvation. The young man is plunged into deep thought, realizing how high the stakes are in this game. The interlocutor timidly asks if he really intends to find the missing hero. That same legendary fighter who is kept under the strictest guard, and whose life is wasted in shackles in the darkest depths of the dungeon. The realization that Ricky Harleys himself is standing in front of him leaves the man in deep shock. The darkness of anger clouds the young man's gaze, displacing any doubts and fears. Not wanting to waste a second, he turns sharply, ready to act against all odds. The messenger panics and tries to stop him, realizing what madness he is planning. He once again reminds us of our fallen comrades, whose death should serve as a stern warning. But Ricky is no longer willing to listen to empty excuses. His decision has already been made. The sudden news of Kim Taehyun's actions leaves the headquarters reeling from shock. The news of the Lee clan's demise leaves no doubt. The enemy is advancing and there is no time to waste. Ricky understands that while they are weighing the risks of safety, his comrades are dying on the front lines. The image of the one for whose smile he is ready to go through any hell appears again before his mind's eye. The time has come not just to defend ourselves, but to repay the accumulated debts to those who have caused so much suffering. His decisive move takes the commander by surprise, interrupting any attempts to stop him. Those present can only silently follow him with their eyes, understanding the futility of further arguments. The old leader's eyes are frozen in silent horror at the coming chaos. Memory takes him to the crimson nightmares of the past, where blood flowed like a river. That terrible day when the battlefield turned into a scorched desert, strewn with the bodies of the fallen. Images of that merciless massacre still torment the souls of survivors, reminding them of the cost of mistakes. Even the most experienced fighters can hardly contain their anxiety, sensing an imminent clash. The commander can only silently pray that this crazy mission does not turn into another tragedy. Meanwhile, under the ominous crimson clouds of the enemy citadel, dark forces are already awakening. Furious monsters, thirsty for fresh blood, are ready to tear apart anyone who dares to disturb their peace. Their devastating attacks know no mercy and bring only instant death, but right at them from the sky falls the swift silhouette of a warrior in shining armor. With one precise movement, his spear pierces the monster's flesh, cutting off any attempt at resistance. The merciless blow is delivered with supernatural speed, leaving the beast no chance. Lowering his weapon, the defender exhales heavily, knowing that this was only the beginning of the real war. Surrounded by a new wave of bloodthirsty creatures, the armored warrior prepares to accept another unequal battle. But before Go Taiwook can bring his blade down on his enemies, a sudden movement in the air causes him to freeze. Someone's leisurely, confident steps echo through the dark vaults of the castle, breaking the oppressive silence. In an instant, a crushing dark wave sweeps away the monsters, causing them to howl in mortal agony. A mysterious ally slowly emerges from the shadows woven behind the astonished knight. Kim Tae-young appears with a slight, almost mocking smirk, as if this battle is just a walk in the park for him. United by a common goal, the two strongest masters are finally reunited in the middle of the destroyed hall. Raising the visor of his helmet, Go Tae-wook looks in surprise at the one whose strength exceeded all his expectations. A thick, ominous aura thickens around them, indicating the presence of an incredibly powerful source of magic. Tae-young is sure that it is here, in the domain of the formidable Duke, that traces of the missing Ricky Harless are hidden. Ahead of them lies only the unknown, which has swallowed up those who dared to cross the threshold of this monastery without permission. An ancient evil lurks in the darkness, fully aware that daring outsiders have entered its sacred territory. A dark pulse emanates from the very depths, calling the heroes to descend into the abyss where the main source of the threat lies hidden. But there is no time to waste because every missed moment brings their enemies closer to their final triumph. Clutching his armor to his chest, Go Tae-wook suppresses his momentary doubt and fully prepares himself for the decisive battle. Drawing his deadly twin blades, Tae-young challenges his comrade to see which one is faster. The next moment they break away from their place, turning into two swift lightning bolts in the middle of the enemy ranks. The steel mercilessly cuts through the monster's flesh, staining the cold stone slabs with their black blood. In this mad dance of death, the two warriors act as a single, perfectly honed mechanism, and Go Tae-wook can only marvel at how this incredible man hid his true, devastating power. Finally, the shackles of pent-up strength are thrown off, and the warrior is ready to reveal his true power. Every detail of his armor seemed to vibrate with the energy that overflowed it. After all, in this merciless slaughter, having a reliable ally nearby is the greatest luxury. A brutal battle between the strongest representatives of humanity unfolds around them, where there is no room for weakness. And even in the very epicenter of this madness, the defender's gaze remains crystal clear and focused. Their combined attacks are flawless. Heavy sword swings are perfectly complemented by the quick lunges of their partner. But the grandeur of these ancient vaults conceals a threat far more insidious than ordinary monsters. The very space around them begins to shrink, pressing on the mind and distorting reality. A sudden flash of intuition causes the warrior to relax his guard for a split second. This moment is enough for a crushing blow to throw him back. A blinding explosion of energy fills the hall, separating the allies with a dense curtain of dust and light. Left alone, Lee Jong-jae suddenly feels mortal danger behind him. A sharp thrust of the enemy blade cuts through the gloom, aiming precisely at a vulnerable spot. Only by a miracle does the boy manage to intercept the deadly steel, staining the hilt with his own blood. But the one who carried out this attack only smiles in anticipation, looking at the futile attempts at resistance. In the dim light, the face of Kim Tae-young appears, a ruthless predator for whom this meeting is just a game. Despite the searing pain, Lee Jong-jae refuses to believe in the inevitability of defeat until the very end. However, the difference in strength between them is too obvious to be compensated for by will alone. Giving his opponent a disdainful look, the attacker understands that this fight will not bring him the desired fun. With one sharp and merciless movement, he breaks the resistance, slamming the enemy into the stone floor. The defeated enemy tries to hide behind a mask of indifference, but the fear in his eyes cannot be hidden. Cody Wood just smirks condescendingly, reveling in his absolute superiority in playing with a sharp blade. But suddenly the silence of the hall is broken by the swift onslaught of a noble knight, who appeared straight from the shadows. A powerful wave of light forces Cody Wood to retreat, saving the wounded Lee Jong-jae from certain death. A predatory fire flashes in the gaze of the retreating villain. He is not at all afraid of this intervention. The defender stands as an insurmountable wall between a fallen comrade and a mad killer. Lee Jong-jae catches his breath, instantly recognizing the attacker as a dangerous international criminal. The knight's silent helmet only confirms the seriousness of the threat hanging over them. However, Cody Wood is only amused, hinting that their meager minds will never be enough to figure out his plan. The tension in the air is rising, and Lee Jong-jae knows that this fight will definitely not be easy. Covering his face with his hand, the madman begins to laugh quietly, preparing to reveal his true, frightening power. A crimson, suffocating aura erupts from his body, causing the very foundations of this ancient hall to tremble. Darkness envelops his silhouette, turning an ordinary man into a nightmarish creature of the abyss. He challenges those who dared to call themselves contractors of the great dukes, proclaiming the beginning of a real massacre. The castle walls begin to crumble under the onslaught of the released energy, and the heavy chains clang pitifully in the darkness. The force of this pressure is so great that it makes the knees buckle from primal terror. Captive Yoshikawa Sarara can only watch helplessly as her last hope for salvation crumbles. Cody Wood's apocalyptic storm fills every corner of the dungeon, leaving no chance for escape. Lee Jong-jae realizes the bitter truth. Before them is not just a criminal, but someone who made a deal with the demons themselves. And now, from the impenetrable darkness, it is not a man who looks at them, but a true monster, thirsting only for destruction. Lee Jong-jae gathers up the last of his courage, realizing that they have nowhere left to retreat. He orders his armored ally to launch a coordinated attack from both sides. The eyes of the faithful knight flash with a furious golden light, ready to carry out any order. The young man's gaze becomes extremely focused, because any mistake now will be fatal. With a furious whistle, the heavy steel blade rushes down, cutting through the musty air of the dungeon. The onslaught of the steel giant seems unstoppable, like a heavy battering ram, sweeping away everything in its path. But Cody Wood only smirks condescendingly as dark, ghostly chains close around his feet. At that very moment, Lee Jong-jae unleashes his most destructive magic, seeking to wipe the enemy off the face of the earth. The faithful knight makes a lightning-fast dash, rushing straight through the enemy's silhouette. But instead of triumph, a heavy, ominous silence suddenly descends on the battlefield. The warrior looks down at his hands in disbelief, not understanding what exactly went wrong. His blade passed through the enemy's flesh, as if through a ghostly mist, leaving not a single scratch. As if to mock, Cody Wood materializes directly behind the victim, clutching a sphere of pure energy in his hand. Lee Jong-jae panics and screams out the madman's name, trying to warn his comrade of his impending death. But it's too late. A devastating flash of light hits the helmet's visor. The next lightning strike sends the armored fighter flying backwards like a rag doll. An air wave of colossal force tears apart space, crushing the centuries-old slabs of the dungeon. The unfortunate warrior crashes into the wall with a deafening roar, raising clouds of stone dust. Blood slowly trickles from beneath the cracked helmet, marking the complete collapse of their desperate plan. Cody Wood just looks around the destruction with indifference, disappointed at how easy and boring this battle turned out to be. Cody Wood smiles with anticipation, feeling an incredible power awakening within him. Watching this, Kim Tae-young cannot hide his growing anxiety. Any enemy attack now seems useless, as the space around Cody begins to distort. A bright, golden flame flares up in his hand, ready to devour everything in its path. A terrifying gravitational singularity appears before the shocked enemy. It is capable of blocking any magical skills within its radius, leaving opponents defenseless. But instead of panic, a mad, predatory grin suddenly appears on Kim Tae-young's face. Cody just smiles condescendingly in response, completely confident in his superiority. His gaze flashes with a cold, golden light, which does not bode well for his enemies. With one easy movement of his hand, he directs the destructive sphere towards the target. With a manic laugh, Cody unleashes primal chaos, causing the air to shake with pressure. A colossal vortex of energy rushes forward, burning out space itself. The opponent freezes in place, mesmerized and terrified by the grandeur of this destructive magic. The next moment he makes a desperate leap, trying to avoid certain death. But while Cody celebrates his easy victory, a deadly trap slams shut behind him. Suddenly, a sharp crimson blade pierces his own chest. Coughing up blood from the unexpected blow, the powerful mage loses his balance. Behind him, Kim Tae-young hovers with a haughty smile, spreading his blood-red wings. Contrary to expectations, the seriously wounded Cody only laughs hoarsely, delighted at the first worthy challenge in a long time. Tearing off his torn clothes, he prepares to show his true strength, because now this fight will be fought according to his rules. Cody Wood's predatory grin speaks for itself. This fight brings him true pleasure. A powerful explosion rocks the ancient hall, turning centuries-old columns into a pile of rubble. A mysterious knight in dark armor emerges majestically from the clouds of dust. His silent figure with black wings exudes unwavering determination and readiness for the final battle. Now the mad warlock faces two of the strongest warriors at once. Lee Jong-jae understands that they no longer have the right to make a mistake, and the slightest delay will cost them their lives. But Cody is only amused by this alliance, and he openly provokes his opponents to attack him together. Suddenly, the air around becomes unbearably heavy, causing the space itself to shake. Under the weight of this indescribable aura, the stone floor slabs begin to crack and come apart at the seams. A wave of primal fear washes over those around them, restricting their movements and depriving them of the ability to breathe. Even Lee Jong-jae, despite all his resilience, can barely stay on his feet under this crushing pressure. Cody easily dispels the remnants of someone else's magic with a single wave of his distorted hand. He admits that he dragged out the game too long, getting carried away by an unprecedented passion. Behind him, as if from the very depths of hell, a colossal dark silhouette begins to emerge. A terrifying, gigantic demon with glowing scarlet eyes looms over the battlefield, embodying death itself. His sinister grin leaves no doubt that there is no mercy to be expected. This sight makes even seasoned fighters freeze for a moment in silent stupor. The ancient monster reproaches its host for softness, calling on him to immediately grind his rivals into dust. However, Cody Wood does not tolerate orders and brazenly demands even more destructive power from his patron. The demon's massive fist clenches, ready to unleash the full force of primordial chaos upon this world. The colossal demon's merciless blow shakes the very foundations of this place, leaving no chance for salvation. Li Zhongjae falls to the cold ground, defeated and bleeding under the weight of this irresistible force. But Cody Wood doesn't care about the fate of others. His gaze is fixed only on the limitless power that he longs to master. The ancient monster rises in all its terrifying glory, shrouded in crimson lightning of primordial chaos. Through the roar of destruction, a desperate, panicked cry is heard, calling on the madman to stop. But the contract with the abyss has already been sealed, and an ominous symbol of awakened power flares in the darkness. With a mad grin on his lips, Cody spreads his blood-red wings, releasing his pent-up anger. A huge crimson serpent bursts from his hands, rushing into a devastating attack against the very embodiment of the underworld.